Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Nightmare Narratives. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious. Where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Vincent Kowalski, but everyone calls me Vince. I've been a forest ranger at Nicolet National Forest in Wisconsin for about 3 years now. Before that, I was a Marine K9 handler. Me and my dog Duke served 2 tours together. I don't like talking about what happened to him. Some nights, I still wake up hearing his yelp when that friendly fire hit our position. That's why I took this job. Out here in the deep woods, it's quiet. Most days, I don't have to talk to anyone but the trees. That was fine by me until last Tuesday when everything changed. I was doing my usual morning patrol when I spotted something strange through the trees. At first, I thought it was just some garbage left by careless campers, but as I got closer, my stomach dropped. It was a hunting party, 4 men arranged in a circle facing outward. Their bodies were partially eaten. The weird part, the bite marks looked human. I've seen bear attacks, wolf kills, but this was different. It was like someone had placed them that way on purpose, like some sick ritual. I radioed it in and secured the scene, but something about those bodies stuck with me. The way they were positioned reminded me of defensive formations we used overseas. That was the first red flag. The forest has felt wrong ever since. I've been a ranger long enough to know these woods, but lately my compass goes haywire for no reason. Trails. I've walked 100 times, suddenly end in places they shouldn't. Yesterday, I watched a group of raccoons move in perfect sync, like soldiers on patrol. The locals have their stories. Back in the 60s, several hikers went missing out here. They caught the guy responsible, or thought they did. Some still whisper about a wild man living deep in the forest. I always figured it was just campfire talk. What's harder to explain is how the wolves have disappeared from the eastern section. They just won't go there anymore. And when I tried to bring my neighbor's dog along on a hike last weekend, the poor thing dug his paws in and wouldn't budge past the trailhead. This morning I found claw marks on trees, way too high for any bear or mountain lion, and the scent markings nearby, they smelled almost human. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Then the phone lines at my station went dead. When I went to drive into town, all 4 of my tires had been slashed. Not torn or punctured, slashed with clean, precise cuts. Someone didn't want me leaving. That night I heard it for the first time, a howl that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human. It triggered something in me, sent me straight back to Afghanistan. It sounded exactly like the cries of wounded men from my unit. I grabbed my rifle and locked all the doors. I'm not stupid. There's someone out there, probably some nutjob escaped from a facility, or maybe some cult that's moved into the remote parts of the forest. I refuse to believe it's anything else. There's always a logical explanation. I've set up a defensive perimeter around the station. Tripwires, motion sensors, the works, just like we did in the Marines. I've got my service weapon and my old military gear. If someone's hunting in my forest, they're about to learn they're not the only predator around. But deep down, something tells me my weapons won't be enough for what's out there. Something tells me I've walked into a war I don't understand yet. It was on the 3rd night when I finally saw it. I'd been patrolling the area around my station, checking the perimeter I'd set up. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see by without my flashlight. That's when I heard branches breaking nearby. Not the random snaps that animals make, but steady, deliberate steps. I crouched down and waited, rifle ready. What stepped into the clearing wasn't a man, but it wasn't an animal either. It stood on 2 legs, nearly 7 feet tall, with a body shaped like a human but covered in dark fur. Its head was wolf-like, with a long snout and pointed ears, but its eyes, those eyes had human intelligence in them. Around its neck hung something that caught the moonlight. Dog tags. Military dog tags. I almost fired right then, but my finger froze on the trigger. The creature tilted its head, studying me the way a wolf studies prey. Then it raised its hand. Not a paw, but a hand with fingers and an opposable thumb, and pointed directly at me. That's when I noticed the scars and markings on its arm. Through patches of thinner fur, I could make out what looked like military tattoos, the kind guys in my unit had. It let out a low growl and turned its head toward the forest. From the darkness came answering howls, at least 6 or 7 different voices. Not random animal noises, but coordinated, like they were communicating. The creature dropped to all fours and bounded back into the trees, moving faster than any human could run. I stood frozen for several minutes before I could make myself return to the station. I spent that whole night with my back to the wall, gun in hand. I kept telling myself I was seeing things, that stress and lack of sleep were making me hallucinate. The next day, I found tracks around my station. Some looked like wolf prints, but others were different, halfway between wolf paws and human feet. And they walked in patterns like patrol routes we used in the Marines. That afternoon, I spotted them again. Not just one, but 3 of the creatures, moving through the trees about 100 yards from my position. They moved like a military unit, maintaining spacing, checking sight lines, using hand signals I recognized from my own training. The big one, the first one I'd seen, was clearly in charge. The others followed its commands without hesitation. They were hunting, but not like animals. They were using tactics. Later that day, I found one. Of my motion sensors had been carefully disabled, not smashed or triggered, but actually taken apart. Whatever these things were, they weren't just strong, they were smart. I radioed for backup again, but all I got was static. I tried to convince myself this was all some elaborate hoax, or maybe a group of survivalists playing games. But deep down, I knew better. These weren't men in costumes, and they weren't just animals. They were something in between, something that shouldn't exist. And somehow, they knew military tactics, they had training, and worst of all, they seemed to be interested in me. That night, I swear I heard one of them call my name from the darkness beyond my windows. After that night, I knew I had to learn more about what I was up against. I began exploring deeper into the forest, following the tracks and signs they left behind. About 5 miles from my station, I found the first marker. It was a pile of bones arranged in a specific pattern. Not random but deliberate, like the formation diagrams we used in combat training. Human bones. I took photos and kept going. The deeper I went, the more markers I found. Some made from bones, others from torn clothing, and some from broken gear, including military equipment. That's when I noticed something strange. Every piece of gear I found had belonged to veterans. Dog tags, scraps of uniforms with name patches still attached, even a worn military ID card. These creatures weren't attacking random hikers. They were targeting people who had served. People like me. On the 4th day of my investigation, I found something that made my blood run cold. A man was hanging from a tree, barely alive. His body was changing. Patches of fur were growing from his skin, and his face had begun to elongate into a muzzle. When he saw me, his eyes widened with recognition. "Kowalski," he rasped, "from the 3rd Battalion." I recognized him then, Martinez, who'd served in a different unit but trained with us a few times. "What happened to you?" I asked, cutting him down. "They bit me," he said, showing me a wound on his arm that was healing too fast to be natural. "The bite, it changes you, but your mind stays awake during the whole thing. You feel yourself becoming something else, but you can't stop it." He told me the pack had ambushed his hunting group a week ago. They'd killed his friends, but kept him alive. They wanted him to join them. "They're veterans, Kowalski," he whispered. "All of them. They pick us because we already know how to hunt, how to kill." Martinez died an hour later, his body twisting into something not quite human, not quite wolf. I buried him deep and marked the grave with stones. The next day I found myself in a part of the forest I'd never seen before. The trees were marked with deep claw marks, and the ground was littered with complicated traps, not simple snares, but sophisticated mechanisms that would take human intelligence to build. I was carefully navigating around one when I heard a familiar whine behind me. I turned slowly, not believing my ears. There, standing in a shaft of sunlight, was Duke, my war dog who had died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Except it wasn't really Duke anymore. His body was twisted, larger, more wolf-like, but the distinctive white patch on his chest was the same. And when I whispered his name, his ears perked up, just like they used to. "Duke," I said again, my voice breaking. He whined and took a step toward me, then stopped as if fighting against some command. Then he turned and ran, looking back once as if wanting me to follow. I did. He led me to an old, abandoned hunting cabin I hadn't known was. There, inside, I found maps of the forest, with military-style notations marking territories, patrol routes, and targets. And there was something else, a faded photograph pinned to the wall. It showed my old unit in Vietnam. I wasn't in it. I wasn't even born yet, but I recognized the insignia. And in the center stood Colonel James Morrison, my father's commanding officer, who was reported killed in action in 1972. Someone had circled the faces of several men in the photo. Some were crossed out. 3 weren't. One of the unmarked faces was my father's. I was still staring at the photo when I heard movement outside. I slipped out the back just as several of the creatures surrounded the cabin. They moved with military precision, clearing angles, covering each other. Leading them was the largest one, the Alpha, wearing dog tags that caught the light. I made it back to my station after dark, my mind racing. These weren't random monsters. They were hunting specific people, survivors of Morrison's unit and their families. They were hunting me. That night, I heard scratching at my door. When I looked through the peephole, no one was there, but a message was carved into the wood. "Join us or join them. Your choice, son of John Kowalski." The war had found me, just like my father always said it would. They came for me that night. I fought hard, but there were too many of them. I remember sharp teeth, searing pain in my shoulder, then darkness. I woke up in a cave, my clothes torn and bloody. The bite wound on my shoulder had already partly healed, forming a strange scar. My body felt different, stronger but wrong somehow. When I looked at my hands, I saw thick hair beginning to grow on my knuckles. "It's starting," said a rough voice from the shadows. A man stepped forward, or what had once been a man. He was caught between forms, his face partly human, partly wolf. I recognized the eyes, though, cold, calculating eyes that matched the faded photograph. "Colonel Morrison," I said. He nodded. "What's left of him? Your father spoke of you, said you were a born hunter." "My father died of cancer 5 years ago," I said, trying to stand. "I know. We were waiting for you to finish your service. The pack needs men with training." He tossed me a scrap of bloody meat. "Eat. You'll need your strength for what's coming." I refused, but my stomach growled with a hunger unlike anything I'd felt before. My senses were changing too. I could smell everything. The earth, the animals that had passed through days ago, the other pack members waiting outside. "The change takes about 3 days, Morrison said. "Fighting it only makes it worse." Over the next day, they kept me captive, watching as my body slowly transformed. New teeth pushed painfully through my gums. My hearing became so sharp, I could hear mice moving through the leaves 100 yards away. On the second night, Morrison brought me on a hunt. A family had set up camp a few miles from my station, a father, mother, and 2 young kids. "Time for your first lesson," Morrison said, his voice now more growl than human speech. I tried to resist, but something was happening to my mind. When I looked at the family, part of me didn't see people anymore. I saw prey. No, I managed to say. Morrison's eyes narrowed. You're still fighting it good. The ones who surrender too easily make poor hunters. But you will hunt, Kowalski. We all do in the end. They forced me to join the pack as they circled the camp. The family had no chance. I tried to warn them, tried to stop myself, but my body wouldn't obey. I watched in horror as my own hands, now, curved into claws, tore through their tent. What happened next haunts me still. I didn't kill them, but I didn't save them either. I stood frozen, fighting the monster growing inside me, while the pack did what packs do. Afterward, I vomited in the bushes, still human enough to feel disgust. Morrison watched me with something like disappointment. Your father adapted faster, he said. The next morning, a military helicopter flew over the forest. Morrison and the others watched it with hatred in their eyes. They're coming, he said. They always come eventually, but we're ready for them. He took me to a ridge overlooking a small clearing. Within hours, a team of soldiers moved through the trees below us, not regular army, some kind of special unit. They carried unusual equipment and moved with the confidence of men who knew exactly what they were hunting. Watch and learn, Morrison said. The pack attacked with frightening coordination. They used tactics I recognized from counterinsurgency operations, flanking maneuvers, diversionary attacks, even false retreats to draw the soldiers into ambushes. Within 20 minutes, the entire squad was dead. That night, Morrison told me the truth. He and his unit hadn't just served in Vietnam. They'd been part of a classified experiment, a biological weapon designed to create super soldiers, something that combined animal instinct with human intelligence. They infected us, he said, then abandoned us when they couldn't control the results. We've been hunting them ever since. The doctors who made us, the officers who ordered it, and the government that covered it up. And my father, I asked. He escaped the initial experiment, but the program didn't end. They've been refining it for generations, using veterans as test subjects because we're already trained to kill. Morrison's plan was to expand the pack, transform every veteran in the region, create an army of creatures like them, then hunt down those responsible for the original experiment. I pretended to accept this, to join them willingly. But inside, I was fighting the change with everything I had. Each day, I looked less human. Each night, I felt the predator inside me growing stronger. But I wasn't the only one still fighting. Some of the newer pack members watched Morrison with doubt in their eyes. They followed orders, but I could sense their reluctance, the human parts of them struggling against the monster just like me. I began quietly sabotaging pack operations while maintaining the appearance of loyalty. I misled hunting parties, warned potential victims when I could, and searched desperately for a way to stop what was happening, both to the forest and to me. Time was running out. My transformation was nearly complete, and with each passing day, I could feel my humanity slipping away. By the end of the week, I barely recognized myself in the reflection of the pond water. My face had elongated into a muzzle. Thick fur covered my body. My hands had become powerful claws that could tear through wood like paper. I was faster, stronger than I'd ever been, and the hunger, the constant hunger for the hunt, never left me. I was sitting by the pond, staring at what I'd become, when I caught a familiar scent on the wind. A scent that shouldn't be here, that sent a jolt of fear through me. My sister, Rachel, I tracked the scent through the forest, moving silently on all fours until I saw her. She was hiking the main trail, calling my name. She had a photo of me in her hand, showing it to a day hiker she'd encountered. He's been missing for a week, I heard her say. The ranger station said he hasn't checked in. I wanted to run to her, to warn her to leave before the pack found her. But I couldn't let her see me like this. And I knew the pack would be watching. They were always watching. Sure enough, Morrison materialized beside me, his massive form blending perfectly with the shadows despite the daylight. Your loyalty, Test has arrived, he growled, his voice barely human anymore. Kill her. She's innocent, I said, fighting to form words with my transformed mouth. She has nothing to do with this. She's your connection to humanity, Morrison said. Break it. He called 3 other pack members forward. Take him to the clearing. I'll bring the woman. They dragged me to a small meadow. My sister's frightened voice grew closer. I struggled against my captors, but they were stronger, fully transformed. Then I heard a familiar whine. Duke was there, watching from the edge of the clearing, his intelligent eyes fixed on me. Duke, I called softly. Help! One of the pack members cuffed me. Shut up. That mutt only follows the alpha now. But as they secured me to a tree, Duke crept closer. Something of our old bond remained, some loyalty stronger than whatever had changed him. When Morrison dragged my screaming sister into the clearing, Duke suddenly lunged at him, clamping powerful jaws on the alpha's arm. The distraction was enough. I broke free from my restraints, the new strength in my limbs surprising even me. Run! I shouted at Rachel, my voice a monstrous growl. Her eyes widened in horror when she saw me. Vince? Oh my God, what happened? To you? No time, I snarled. Run! Morrison threw Duke against a tree with a sickening crack. The loyal dog crumpled to the ground. Rage filled me, pushing back the horror of what I'd become. I charged Morrison, catching him off guard. We crashed through the underbrush, a tangle of fur and fangs. He was stronger, more experienced in his transformed body, but my fury gave me strength. You can't beat me, he growled as he pinned me down. I've been this way for 50 years. You're just a pup. I don't have to beat you, I managed to say. Just stop you. That's when the first shot rang out. One of the pack members dropped, a tranquilizer dart in his neck. More shots followed. A military team had surrounded the clearing. Not regular soldiers, but a specialized unit. They wore hazard suits and carried weapons designed to subdue, not kill. Subject Alpha identified, one of them said into a radio. Operation Silverback is a go. Morrison howled in rage. They've found us again. Kill them all. But something strange happened. Several pack members hesitated, looking at each other with uncertainty. The human parts of them were resurfacing, questioning orders that meant more bloodshed. He's lying to us, I called out, still struggling beneath Morrison's weight. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about his madness. A helicopter appeared overhead, and a voice boomed from a loudspeaker. Attention all infected personnel. We have developed a treatment for your condition. Surrender now, and you will receive medical care. Morrison's eyes blazed with fury. Lies! They said the same thing in 72. They'll kill you all. But I could smell something Morrison couldn't, hope from the other pack members. They wanted to believe. They wanted to be human again. What if it's true, said a younger pack member, one who'd been transformed only days before me. What if they can turn us back? Morrison roared and leapt at him, tearing out his throat. Traitors, all of you! That's when the pack fractured. Half attacked the military team. The others turned on Morrison and his loyalists. In the chaos, I crawled to where Duke lay injured. He whined softly as I approached. Good boy, I whispered, gently touching his head. Best boy. He licked my transformed hand once, then closed his eyes for the last time. A new rage filled me. I turned toward Morrison, who was tearing through both soldiers and rebellious pack members with equal fury. I knew then what I had to do. My humanity was fading, but I could use what the virus had given me for one final purpose. I charged. Morrison from behind, my transformed body moving faster than I ever could have as a human. We rolled across the ground in a tangle of fur and fangs, crashing through the underbrush until we broke through to the edge of a steep ravine. You're like your father, Morrison snarled as we grappled at the edge. Too weak to embrace what we've become. My father resisted you, I growled back. That's not weakness, that's strength. With one powerful movement, I shoved us both off the edge. We fell, clawing and biting at each other. until we hit the rocks below. My name is Delilah May Crenshaw, and I never believed in fate until it showed me the pages where my name was written nearly 150 years before I was born. I came to Blackwing Ridge in the Monongahela National Forest looking for quiet. After 8 years working as a psychiatric nurse in Charleston, I needed the silence of the trees. I needed a place where the voices in my head were just my own. The ranger station was perfect. A small cabin tucked away in the West Virginia mountains, miles from the nearest neighbor. Just me, the wildlife, and endless forest trails to patrol. What I didn't tell anyone during my job interview was why I really left nursing. It wasn't burnout, though God knows I was tired. It was fear. Fear of what I was starting to see in my patients. Or rather, what they were seeing in me. It started with old Mrs. Halley, who grabbed my wrist during medication, rounds, and told me my sister would have twins. I didn't even know my sister was pregnant. 3 months later, she delivered identical boys. Then there was Jacob, the schizophrenic teenager who drew pictures of a car accident with stunning detail. The same accident I'd be in 2 weeks later. The broken tail light, the dented blue hood, even the exact intersection. When 5 different patients in 1 month started having episodes where they predicted things about my life. Things no one could possibly know. I knew I needed to get away, far away. Somewhere I could convince myself it was all coincidence. Blackwing Ridge seemed perfect. The job posting mentioned isolation like it was a drawback. For me, it was the main selling point. My first week was peaceful. I hiked the trails, checked camping permits, and slept better than I had in years. Then I found the records room. Every ranger station keeps historical documents, old maps, weather patterns, incident reports. I was organizing the filing cabinet when I found a dusty folder labeled Town Meeting Minutes, 1823. Inside was a yellowed page with handwritten notes that made my blood run cold. The council has determined that when disaster next threatens, a herald shall arrive to warn us. She will come in the year 2023, bearing the name Delilah May. She will know the signs and see what others cannot. My hands trembled as I read my own name on paper that was nearly 2 centuries old. Below it was today's exact date. That night, the headache started. Blinding pain that came in waves, always strongest when I faced east toward Point Pleasant, the town where people first spotted the Mothman back in the 60s. The locals don't call it Mothman, though. In hushed voices at the general store, they call it the Herald of Death. I tried to ignore it all, the headaches, the document, the whispers. I told myself it was stress, maybe carbon monoxide from the old heater in my cabin. I focused on my work, on the blessed isolation I'd sought. But isolation plays tricks on your mind. Or maybe it just removes the distractions that keep us from seeing what's really there. On my second Saturday, I watched a flock of starlings form a perfect figure 8 in the sky, hold it for exactly 44 seconds, then disperse. My radio picked up fragments of conversations that couldn't possibly be happening. Voices discussing a bridge collapse, counting casualties, saying my name. When I touched the framed newspaper in the visitor center, a yellowed clipping about the Silver Bridge disaster in 1967. I saw it happen. Not just saw it, but felt it. Metal twisting, cars plunging into icy water, people screaming, 46 souls crying out as they died. I felt each one. I dropped the frame, and it shattered on the floor. The park superintendent found me there, sobbing among the broken glass. I blamed it on memories of a patient who died under my care. He believed me, or pretended to. But the townspeople looked at me differently after that, like they were waiting for something, like they knew who or what I really was. And deep in the forest, something was watching me too. Something with wings that blocked the moonlight and eyes that burned like embers in the dark. I first saw it on a night when the moon hung full and heavy in the sky. I was doing a final check of the camping areas before turning in, sweeping my flashlight across empty sites to make sure no fires had been left burning. The beam caught something at the edge of the trees, something tall and dark that shouldn't have been there. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest like it wanted out. It stood at least 10 feet high, with shoulders wider than any man I'd ever seen. But it wasn't a man. The shape of it was all wrong. And then it spread its wings. Huge moth-like things that seemed to drink in the moonlight. What scared me most were its eyes, red and glowing like hot coals fixed right on me. I felt something cold wrap around my mind, a feeling of dread so strong. My knees almost gave out. I ran, dropped my flashlight and ran all the way back to my cabin, locked the door and sat with my back against it until morning came. When the sun rose, I told myself it was stress, maybe a bear standing on its hind legs. But deep down I knew better. The headaches were getting worse, coming more often, and strange things kept happening that I couldn't explain away. My phone would die, then suddenly turn back on with the battery showing 44%. The clock in my cabin stopped at 5:04 every day, no matter how many times I reset it. Birds would go silent when I walked under them, then burst into frantic calls once I passed. A week after my first sighting, I was sorting through some old files when I found records of disasters in the area. Every 44 years, like clockwork, a mining collapse in 1824 that killed 23 people, a flash flood in 1868 that wiped out half a town, a forest fire in 1912, and the Silver Bridge collapse in 1967. Each disaster had been preceded by sightings of a winged figure. That night, I dreamed of the bridge again. But this time, I wasn't just watching it happen. I was there, standing on the metal deck as it began to shake. I could feel the vibrations through my shoes, hear the terrible groan of steel giving way. People around me were screaming, running for solid ground, but I couldn't move. In the dream, I looked up and saw it perched on top of the bridge's suspension tower, the winged figure watching, not causing the collapse, just witnessing it. I woke up drenched in sweat, my sheets twisted around me like ropes. The red numbers on my clock read 5:04 a.m. That morning, I drove into town for supplies. At the general store, Mrs. Whitaker, the owner, gave me a strange look as she rang up my groceries. "You've been up to the old fire tower yet?" she asked, her voice casual but her eyes watchful. "No," I said. "Is it worth seeing?" "Might be. Best view of the valley from up there. They say on clear days you can see all the way to Point Pleasant." She leaned closer. "Some folks go up there when they need answers, when they're seeing things they can't explain." I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of things? Mrs. Whitaker just smiled and handed me my change. "You already know, don't you, Ranger Crenshaw? That's why you're here." On my way out, I noticed a bulletin board covered with pictures of townspeople. In the center was a faded photo of a group standing in front of the ranger station, my station, dated December 1967, just days after the Silver Bridge collapse. They were all looking at a woman in a ranger uniform, her face turned away from the camera. Someone had circled the woman in red pen. Next to the circle, in shaky handwriting, the Herald. I left the store in a hurry, feeling eyes on my back. In my truck, I checked my calendar. Today was November 18, 2023. The Silver Bridge had collapsed on December 15th, 1967. That night, it came to my window. I was reading by lamplight when the bulb flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, I felt a presence outside, heavy, waiting. I pulled back the curtain, and there it was, its massive wings spread wide, blocking out the stars. Those burning eyes stared right into mine, and then, like a radio tuning to a station, I heard words in my head that weren't my own. "You see what others cannot. You will bear witness." The headache that hit me then was the worst yet. Images flashed through my mind. The bridge, water churning below, metal twisting, people falling. But now I could see details. a blue sedan with a child's toy on the dashboard. An old man clutching a wrapped Christmas present as his car plunged down. A young couple reaching for each other as the road disappeared beneath them. When I could see again, the creature was gone. But I knew now why I was here, and I knew I wasn't the first. The next morning, I drove to the old fire tower Mrs. Whitaker had mentioned. It stood like a lonely sentinel on the highest ridge. Rusted metal stairs spiraling up to a small room with windows on all sides. My footsteps echoed as I climbed, each step taking me higher above the forest canopy. The view from the top stole my breath. Miles of rolling green mountains stretched in every direction. And there in the distance, I could just make out the silver ribbon of the Ohio River, and beyond it, Point Pleasant. The tower room was dusty but not empty. Someone had been using it. There were books stacked in one corner, newspaper clippings taped to the walls, and a large map pinned to a corkboard. Red pins marked spots across the region, all places where disasters had struck. I moved closer to examine the newspaper clippings. They were about the Silver Bridge collapse, but also about other tragedies, the ones I'd found in the old records, happening every 44 years. Next to each article was a photograph or sketch of a person. Different faces, different times, but all wearing ranger uniforms. My heart started racing when I found a folder labeled Heralds. Inside were profiles of 6 people dating back to 1824. Each had been a park ranger or forest guide in the area. Each had reported strange visions before major disasters, and each had disappeared or died shortly after. The most recent was a man named Robert Keene, ranger at Blackwing Ridge in 1967. His file contained a psychiatric evaluation noting extreme anxiety, claims of precognitive abilities, and delusions of a winged entity communicating telepathically. The final entry, dated December 16, 1967, simply read, "Missing, presumed deceased, Silver Bridge incident." Below his file was a blank one with my name on it. I dropped the folder like it had burned me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick up my phone to check the date, November 19th, 2023, less than a month until December 15th. As I turned to leave, I noticed something scratched into the wooden table. Words carved deep with a knife. The pattern continues. 44 years. The Mothman chooses. We prepare. Mothman. The name sent a shiver down my spine. I'd heard stories growing up in West Virginia, a creature that appeared before the Silver Bridge disaster, a harbinger of death. I'd always thought it was just local legend, something to scare tourists. Now I knew better. On my way back down the mountain, my phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown, but I answered anyway. "Ranger Crenshaw," I said. "You found the tower." It wasn't a question. The voice belonged to an older man, his tone matter-of-fact. "Who is this?" "My name is Thomas Webb. I was the mayor here back in '67. I knew Robert Keene, and I've been waiting for you." We met at a small diner just outside town. Thomas Webb was in his 80s, thin and stooped, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He didn't waste time with small talk. "You've seen it, haven't you, the Mothman?" I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "And the visions, they've started? The bridge?" "How do you know about that?" I whispered. "Because it's always the same." He sighed, looking older by the second. "Every 44 years, it chooses someone to witness what's coming. Someone with the right sensitivity. Usually someone already dealing with the pain of others. Doctors, nurses, counselors." "Like a psychiatric nurse," I said. "Exactly. You're already tuned to frequencies most people can't hear. Makes you the perfect antenna for whatever this thing is." I thought about my patients who'd predicted things about me. Had I somehow been picking up their abilities, or had something been preparing me all along? The town knows, don't they? They've been watching me, waiting. Thomas nodded. We've learned over generations. When the herald comes, disaster follows. We prepare as best we can. Prepare for what? What's going to happen? I don't know exactly. That's why we need you. The herald always sees it clearly before it happens. Robert saw the bridge. The herald before him saw the fire of 12. And what happened to them? To the other heralds? Thomas looked down at his coffee. They don't usually survive. The visions get stronger, more frequent. Some go mad from it. Others, they become part of the event somehow. You're saying I'm going to die? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too calm. I'm saying you have a purpose. You can warn us, save lives, but there's always a price. That night, back in my cabin, I spread out everything I'd collected. The old records, copies of the Herald files, my own notes. It was all connected. The 44-year cycle, the disasters, the Mothman appearances, the Heralds, and now me. As if, summoned by my thoughts, a searing headache hit me. This time I didn't fight it. I let the vision come. I saw the town preparing, stockpiling supplies, creating evacuation plans, all based on information from previous heralds. I saw government officials discovering unusual electromagnetic readings in the area, sending teams to investigate. I saw myself standing on a bridge. Not the Silver Bridge, which had never been rebuilt after the '67 collapse, but a newer one spanning the same stretch of river. And I saw the date, December 15th, 2023, exactly 56 years after the Silver Bridge disaster. The cycle had shifted. When the vision faded, I wasn't alone in my cabin. The Mothman stood in the corner, its massive form somehow fitting in the small space, wings folded against its back. Its eyes glowed like twin embers in the darkness. Why me? I asked, surprised by my own courage. The answer came not in words, but in images. My years as a nurse, listening to patients, feeling their pain, seeing what others missed. My sensitivity, my isolation, my ability to stand at the edge between worlds. What do you want from me? This time, the message was clear. Witness, warn, become. The next morning, I woke to the sound of helicopters. 3 black choppers circled above the forest, making tight passes over my ranger station. Through my binoculars, I could see they weren't park service or local police. They were military, unmarked, except for small numbers on their tails. By noon, a convoy of government vehicles had set up a perimeter around the visitor center. Men in dark suits interviewed park staff. Others in military fatigues unloaded equipment from trucks, satellite dishes, monitoring stations, things I couldn't identify. I watched from a distance, knowing they'd come for me eventually. My phone rang at 1:44 p.m. "Ranger Crenshaw," said a crisp female voice. "This is Dr. Eleanor Reed with the Department of Energy. We'd like to speak with you about some unusual electromagnetic phenomena we've detected in your area." I agreed to meet her, knowing it was a half-truth at best. When I arrived at the visitor center, the woman who greeted me didn't look like a scientist. She had the hard eyes of someone used to making difficult decisions. "Thank you for coming in," she said, leading me to a room that had been converted into a makeshift office. Maps covered one wall, with areas circled in red. A timeline stretched across another, marking disasters throughout the region's history. Every 44 years, just as Thomas had said. "You know why we're here?" I said, not a question. Dr. Reed studied me for a moment before nodding. "We monitor patterns, Ranger Crenshaw. Energy fluctuations, geological anomalies, historical recurrences. This area has been on our radar for decades. Since 1967, I guessed. Since the bridge. Before that, actually. But yes, the Silver Bridge incident was when we fully understood what we were dealing with." She tapped a folder on her desk. "Your file says you were a psychiatric nurse before coming here. Did you ever have patients who seemed to know things they shouldn't?" The question caught me off guard. "How did you—" "It's part of the profile. The entity chooses people with certain receptive qualities, people who can serve as conduits. Conduits for what? Information? Warnings? We're not entirely sure. She leaned forward. What we do know is that you're experiencing visions, just like the others before you. We need to know what you've seen. I told her about the bridge visions, the date, December 15th, only 3 weeks away. As I spoke, men in lab coats monitored equipment in the corner of the room, nodding at each other. The readings are consistent, one of them said to Dr. Reed. She's the focal point. What readings? I demanded. What are you measuring? Dr. Reed sighed. Your brain activity, Ranger Crenshaw. You're emitting patterns we've only seen in previous heralds, patterns that suggest you're receiving information from elsewhere. From the Mothman. She winced at the name. We prefer not to use local terminology. But yes, from the entity. And you want me to tell you what I see so you can stop it? Something flashed across her face. Hesitation, guilt, I couldn't tell. That's not exactly how this works. Before she could explain, a splitting headache hit me like a hammer. I grabbed the edge of the desk, knocking papers to the floor. The room tilted and blurred around me. In my vision, I saw the new bridge over the Ohio River, cars crossing during rush hour, snow falling lightly. A structural weakness in the eastern support column, microscopic cracks spreading like spider webs through the concrete. And something else, a presence hovering nearby, not just watching this time, but hungry, waiting for the moment when those tiny cracks would give way and send dozens of people plunging into the icy river below. I felt the Mothman's consciousness brush against mine, showing me more. Behind the creature was something bigger, something that existed partly in our world and partly elsewhere. A vast intelligence that fed on the psychic energy released in moments of terror and death. The Mothman wasn't causing the disasters. It was just the scout, the herald for something far worse. When I came back to myself, I was on the floor. Medical staff hovered over me, checking my pupils, my pulse. Dr. Reed watched from a few feet away, her face grim. You saw it, she said. The real thing behind our Mothman. I nodded, still shaking. You knew. You've always known. Not always. But yes, we've known for some time that the entity is just a messenger for something else, something that feeds on human suffering. Then why haven't you stopped it? Why let people die every 44 years? Dr. Reed helped me to a chair. Because the alternative is worse, much worse. These events, they're like pressure valves, small releases that prevent a much larger catastrophe. I stared at her in horror. You're letting people die. We're saving many more. Her voice was steady, rehearsed. If the psychic energy isn't released in controlled bursts, it builds up. The entity fully manifests, and then we lose not dozens but thousands, maybe millions. I don't believe you. You've seen it yourself, in your visions. What waits behind the Mothman? She was right. I had seen it. A vast, hungry presence, pushing at the boundaries between worlds. So what happens now, I asked. We need you to tell us exactly what you saw, when and where the bridge will fail, how many casualties to expect, so you can evacuate people, save them. Dr. Reed looked away. Not exactly. And that's when I understood. They weren't going to stop it. They were going to let it happen, just manage the aftermath, use me to prepare their response, minimize collateral damage, but still allow those people to die. No, I said, standing up. I won't help you sacrifice innocent people. You don't have a choice, Ranger Crenshaw. The visions won't stop. They'll get worse, more frequent. You'll be overwhelmed. And the entity has chosen you. It won't let you walk away. Watch me, I said, heading for the door. 2 armed guards stepped in front of me. Dr. Reed's voice was almost kind as she said, I'm afraid we need to keep you under observation, for your own safety, as well as others. The heralds often become unstable as the event approaches. They took me to a makeshift medical facility they'd set up in the ranger station basement. A bed, monitoring equipment, and a door that locked from the outside. For 3 days, they kept me there, asking questions, recording my answers, measuring my brain activity whenever a vision hit. And the visions were getting worse. Almost constant now. I saw the bridge collapse from every angle, felt the deaths of each person who would be on it, saw their faces, knew their names, their hopes, their last thoughts as they plunged into the icy water. Between visions, the Mothman visited. Not physically. They had the room too heavily guarded. But, in my mind, it showed me more of the truth. The entity behind it all had been feeding on this region for centuries, drawn to a weak point in reality somewhere near Point Pleasant. The Mothman was its scout, its warning system, and the heralds were chosen not just to witness, but to amplify the psychic energy of the disasters. We were antennas, broadcasting human suffering to something that fed on it. On the third night, something changed. The visions shifted, showing me not just what would happen, but what could happen. Possibilities, choices, and a way out. That night, while the guard outside my door dozed, I heard a soft tap at my window. Thomas Webb's weathered face peered in at me. "The town's been watching," he whispered after I slid the window open. "We know they took you. Can you climb out?" The window was small, but I was desperate. I squeezed through, scraping my shoulders on the frame, and dropped to the ground beside him. In the distance, I could see the lights of the government camp, but this side of the building was dark. "We don't have much time," Thomas said, leading me through the trees to where an old pickup truck waited. "They'll notice you're gone at the morning check." "Where are we going?" I asked as we drove away from the station, headlights off until we reached the main road. "To the bridge. It's time you saw it for yourself, not just in visions." The new bridge, spanning the Ohio River, was bigger than its predecessor, built to replace the Silver Bridge after the '67 collapse. At 2 a.m., it stood empty except for the occasional truck rumbling across. We parked at a viewpoint on the West Virginia side. 11 days, I said, staring at the structure. On December 15th, at 5:04 p.m., the eastern support column will fail. The bridge will collapse with 32 vehicles on it. 47 people will die. Thomas nodded grimly. Can it be stopped? I thought about what Dr. Reed had said, about pressure valves and controlled releases, about the greater horror waiting if the cycle was broken. "I don't know," I admitted. "The government believes letting it happen prevents something worse." "And what do you believe?" I closed my eyes, trying to sort through the jumble of visions and impressions the Mothman had shared. I think there's another way. The entity feeds on fear and death. It needs the psychic energy of human suffering. But what if there was another source of energy? Something just as powerful but not built on pain. A plan was forming in my mind. Crazy, desperate, but possible. "I need your help," I told Thomas, "and I need the town." For the next week, we worked in secret. Thomas rallied the townspeople, who'd been preparing for disaster, but now with a different purpose. I shared my plan, and they listened. They believed. We couldn't evacuate the bridge. The government was watching too closely, and they'd stop any obvious attempt to interfere with the pressure valve. But we could be ready. On December 15th, I returned to the bridge, not as a captive, not as a herald, but as something else. I'd spent the week in meditation, practicing what my psychiatric patients had unknowingly taught me, how to open my mind, how to receive and transmit. The Mothman had visited each night, and instead of fighting it, I'd listened, learned. I stood at the center of the bridge at 4:30 p.m. watching cars pass by. Snow fell softly, just as in my visions. In half an hour, the eastern support would begin to fail. At 4:45, Thomas and 50 townspeople arrived, parking their vehicles at both ends of the bridge. They didn't block traffic, that would have alerted authorities, but they slowed it, creating a buffer. At 4:50, Dr. Reed's black SUV screeched to a halt at the edge of the bridge. She ran toward me, 2 armed guards following. "Crenshaw!" she shouted. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," I called back. "I'm breaking the cycle. You'll doom us all." "No, there's another way." At 5 I felt it, the Mothman, circling high above, invisible to most. Eyes but clear to mine now. And behind it, the hungry presence, the entity, pressing close to our world, waiting for its feast. I reached out with my mind, the way I'd been practicing, connected to the Mothman first, then through it, to the greater entity. "I know what you want," I thought. "I know what you need. But you won't find it here, not anymore." Dr. Reed was getting closer, her guards drawing weapons. "Stand down, Crenshaw, you can't stop this." "I'm not trying to stop it," I said. "I'm redirecting it." At exactly 5:04 p.m., I felt the eastern support begin to crack, tiny fissures spreading through concrete and steel, just as I'd seen. The bridge shuddered slightly beneath my feet. But instead of terror, I filled my mind with something else. And all around the bridge, the townspeople did the same. Hope, determination, unity, 51 minds focused on life, not death, on protection, not destruction, on standing together against the darkness. I felt the Mothman's surprise, then its understanding. It was a herald, yes, but not bound to one master. It could choose. The entity behind it raged, pushing harder against the veil between worlds. The bridge shook more violently. A hairline crack appeared in the pavement at my feet. Dr. Reed reached me, grabbing my arm. "What are you doing?" "Giving it what it needs, but not what it wants," I gasped, the strain of holding the psychic connection making it hard to speak. "Energy, emotion, but not fear, not death." "It won't accept that," she insisted. "It needs suffering." "No, it's just gotten used to suffering. We're showing it another way." The crack in the pavement widened. Car tires squealed as drivers felt the bridge shift. But the townspeople held firm, their minds linked to mine, feeding the entity a different kind of energy. For one terrible moment, I thought we'd failed. The bridge dropped several inches, metal groaning. People screamed. Then I felt the Mothman make its choice. Instead of feeding our fear to its master, it channeled our hope, our determination. The entity recoiled at first, then, slowly, began to accept this new offering. The bridge stabilized. The cracks stopped spreading. Dr. Reed stared at her monitoring equipment in disbelief. The energy signatures, they're changing, adapting. She looked up at me with new respect. "You're teaching it a new way to feed." "We all are," I said, gesturing to the townspeople, breaking the cycle of death. That night, exhausted but alive, I sat with Thomas and the others in the town hall. The government team had retreated to reassess, confused by readings they'd never seen before. "Will it last?" Thomas asked. "This new arrangement?" "I don't know," I admitted. "The entity has fed on fear for centuries, but it's accepted our offering. For now and the Mothman, yes, it's still here, still watching, but not as a herald of death anymore. More like a guardian." I knew my work wasn't done. The entity might revert to its old hunger. The government might decide our experiment was too dangerous. But for the first time since finding my name in those old town records, I felt hope. 1 month later, I stood on the fire tower, looking out over the valleys and ridges of the Monongahela forest. The headaches had faded, but not my connection to the Mothman. I could feel it nearby, watching, waiting. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. "Ranger Crenshaw," I answered. "This is Dr. Reed." Her voice was different now, less commanding. "We've been monitoring the situation. The entity appears to be maintaining the new feeding pattern." "That's good news." "Yes and no. We've detected Similar energy signatures in other locations, other weak points. I understood immediately. You need more people like me, more redirectors. Yes. Would you be willing to help find them? Train them? I thought about my patients back at the hospital, about the young woman who'd started working at the visitor center last week, who'd confided that she sometimes saw things before they happened. I already have, I said. That evening, as darkness fell, I walked to the edge of the ridge. The Mothman was there, waiting, its wings spreading wide against the stars. Show me, I said. In my mind, I saw the next potential herald, a young park ranger in Wyoming with dreams that made him wake up screaming. I saw the hunger building in another weak spot between worlds. I saw the cycle trying to begin again, but I also saw the possibility of change, of teaching these entities a different way to exist alongside humanity, of turning harbingers of death into something else. We have work to do, I told the Mothman. As I walked back toward my cabin, I felt its presence following me like a shadow. Not my enemy anymore, not exactly my friend, but my responsibility. The prophet of Blackwing Ridge had a new prophecy to share, one of hope, not disaster. And this time, I would make sure people listened. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, Ellie to the few folks who know me well enough. I'm 39 years old, and I've been a ranger here in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey for almost 15 years now. Before that, I worked in a munitions factory during the war. That's where I met my husband, James. He shipped out to the Pacific in '43 and never came home. After that, I couldn't stand to make weapons anymore. Something in me broke, and then something else grew in its place. I wanted to protect things, not destroy them. So I found my way to these woods, these ancient pines and cedar swamps that stretch across southern New Jersey like a secret the rest of the state tries to forget. I thought I knew these woods better than anyone. I was wrong. It started 3 weeks ago on a misty Tuesday morning in April. I was checking on reports of unusual wildlife activity, deer behaving strangely, birds abandoning their usual migration patterns. Nothing that would make the newspapers, but the kind of thing that makes an old ranger like me pay attention. I followed a creek I'd walked 100 times before, but that day the water ran with a strange, oily sheen. The trees looked wrong too. Have you ever seen a pine tree grow in a spiral? I hadn't either until that day. The trunks twisted like corkscrews, reaching toward the sky in ways trees shouldn't grow. The birds were quiet. That's always a bad sign in the woods. I followed that creek deeper than my usual patrol route, into a part of the barrens where the locals don't go. They have stories about this place, old stories about the Jersey Devil, a creature born of a mother's curse. I never put much stock in those tales. The creek led me to a sinkhole, fresh by the look of it, maybe opened up during the heavy rains we had last month. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. Concrete walls, metal pipes, the unmistakable remnants of a man-made structure buried under decades of soil and pine needles. The earth had swallowed it, but now it was giving up its secret. I climbed down into that hole, my boots splashing in filthy water. The building had collapsed inward, but I could still make out what it had been, a factory floor, heavy machinery now rusted beyond recognition. And everywhere, barrels. Hundreds of them, some split open and leaking substances that glowed faintly in the dim light. On one of the crumbling walls was a faded emblem I recognized instantly. It was the logo of the very company I'd worked for. During the war, this wasn't just any factory. This was an extension of our munitions operation, one I'd never known existed. They must have built it out here, away from prying eyes, to test the weapons we made. I found a filing cabinet that had somehow survived the decades underground. Inside were documents, protected in a waterproof container, test reports, chemical formulas, maps of dumping sites throughout the Pine Barrens. My hands shook as I read. Through them, the weapons I helped build weren't just tested here. Their chemical byproducts were dumped right into the soil and water of the Barrens for decades. That's when I heard it, a sound no human throat could make. Part screech, part roar, echoing through the trees above the sinkhole. I stuffed as many documents as I could into my pack and climbed out. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a deer. At least, it had once been a deer. Its antlers grew in twisted spirals, like the pines. Its eyes were too large, too aware, and when it opened its mouth, I saw rows of teeth no deer should have. It watched me for a long moment, then bounded away into the twisted trees. That night, I spread the documents across my kitchen table and began to understand the horror of what had happened here. The company hadn't just polluted the Barrens, they had poisoned it systematically, creating a toxic legacy that was still killing the land decades later. What I didn't understand yet was why the local people had kept silent, or how deep the corruption went, or that the Jersey Devil wasn't just a myth anymore, if it ever had been. I didn't know that I was already on its list. And I certainly didn't know that everything I was seeing, the twisted trees, the mutated wildlife, the toxic seepage, was just the beginning of the Pine Barrens reckoning. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those twisted trees and that deer with too many teeth. I kept thinking about all those chemicals sitting under the forest floor for decades, seeping into the groundwater, changing everything they touched. The next morning, I called my old friend Bill Parker, who'd worked with me at the factory. If anyone would know about a secret testing site, it'd be Bill. But when I called, his wife answered. Her voice shook when she told me Bill had died 3 days ago. Found in the woods behind their house, his body twisted in ways a human body shouldn't bend. The doctors said it was a heart attack, but she didn't believe it. Not with the burns on his skin and the strange smell that hung around him, like battery acid and pine sap mixed together. I hung up the phone with a chill running down my spine. That afternoon, I went back to the sinkhole. I needed more evidence, something I could take to the authorities. But when I got there, everything had changed. The hole was bigger, like something had clawed its way out from below. The oily water had risen, covering most of the factory ruins, and hanging in the air was that same smell Bill's wife had described, battery acid and pine sap. I took samples of the water in some old jars I'd brought. As I was screwing the lid on the last jar, I heard branches snapping behind me. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw it for the first time. It stood upright, but it wasn't human. 12 feet tall if it was an inch, with leathery wings folded against its back. Its skin was a patchwork of scales and fur, slick with something that looked like the same oily substance from the water. Its head was shaped like a horse's, but where? There should have been eyes, were just empty sockets that glowed with a sickly green light. The Jersey Devil. The myth made real, or maybe it had always been real, and the chemicals had just made it stronger, angrier. It opened its mouth and let out that same screech roar I'd heard before. I could see now it had 3 rows of teeth, sharp as razors. A thick yellowish liquid dripped from its jaws, sizzling when it hit the ground. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, crashing through the underbrush, my lungs burning. I could hear it behind me, moving through the trees, sometimes on the ground, sometimes in the air above the canopy. I made it to my truck and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I dropped them twice. As I finally got the engine started, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw it standing at the edge of the road watching me. It didn't follow. It didn't need to. Somehow I knew it was smart enough to find me whenever it wanted. That night, I locked all my doors and windows. I spread out the documents I'd taken and started making calls. First to other rangers, then To old colleagues from the factory days. 3 more were dead, all in the last month, all found in or near the woods, all with strange burns on their bodies. One name kept coming up in the documents: Dr. Howard Chambers, head of chemical disposal for the company. He was still alive, living in a big house on the edge of town. I needed to talk to him. As I was writing down his address, my lights flickered, then went out completely. In the sudden silence after my refrigerator stopped humming, I heard something moving on my roof. Slow, heavy steps, claws scraping against the shingles. I sat frozen in the dark, barely breathing. A thick, yellowish liquid began to drip from the ceiling, making a small puddle on my kitchen floor. It smelled like battery acid and pine sap. The Jersey Devil wasn't just hunting me. It was letting me know I was already caught. I spent the night in my truck, parked outside the sheriff's office, too scared to go back home, too unsure of who to trust. When morning came, I drove straight to Dr. Howard Chambers' house. It was a big, white house with perfect green grass, the kind that doesn't belong next to the wild pine barrens. Dr. Chambers was in his 70s now, but he stood straight and tall when he answered the door. His face changed when I told him who I was. "Eleanor Hartwell," he said, like he was tasting something sour. "Come in before someone sees you." His living room was full of photos of him shaking hands with important people. He didn't offer me a seat. "You worked on the line," he said. "Shell assembly, right? You shouldn't be poking around in things you don't understand." I showed him the papers I'd found. His face went pale. "Where did you get these?" "The old testing site. It's leaking. Dr. Chambers, whatever you buried down there is killing the forest. And I think it's killing people too." He walked to his window and looked out at the trees in the distance. "We didn't know back then," he said quietly. "Or maybe we didn't want to know. The war needed weapons. The weapons needed chemicals. The chemicals needed somewhere to go. But you kept dumping after the war," I said. "For decades." He turned to me, his eyes cold. It was cheaper. The company had contracts to fulfill. And the barons, well, no one important cared about that wasteland. People live there. Animals live there. I live there. "And now you've woken it up," he said. "Disturbed the balance we created." "Woken what up?" "The Jersey Devil isn't just a story, Miss Hartwell. The Lenape people knew about it centuries ago. They said it was a curse upon the land, punishment for what the settlers did to them." I thought he was crazy, but after what I'd seen, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. "When we started dumping," he continued, "we noticed it got stronger, changed. We made a deal. A deal with a monster, with a force of nature," he corrected. "We provided it with chemicals that made it powerful. In return, it stayed in its territory and didn't interfere with our operation." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You fed toxic waste to a creature from folklore. It protected our interests, kept locals from asking questions. Anyone who got too curious had accidents." His voice was so calm, like he was talking about the weather. That's when I realized the company hadn't just polluted the barrens. They'd weaponized what lived there. "But now something's changed," I said. "It's killing former factory workers, people like me." Dr. Chambers nodded. "The agreement is breaking down. The company stopped the special dumping program years ago. Too much government oversight. But it seems our friend hasn't forgotten those who created it." He walked to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. "This is a list of everyone who worked on the Pine Barrens operation. Everyone who handled the chemicals, who knew about the dumping, everyone who's marked." I took the folder. My name was on page 3, with a red check mark next to it. "Why? Are you helping me?" I asked. "I'm not," he said simply. "My name is on that list too. I'm just the last one it's coming for." As if on cue, the lights in his house flickered. Outside, the perfect green lawn began to turn brown, like something was poisoning it from below. "It's here," he whispered. I ran to the window. The grass was dying in a perfect circle around the house, spreading outward like a ripple in water. And at the edge of his property, where the manicured lawn met the wild forest, stood the Jersey Devil. In daylight, it looked even more wrong. Parts of it seemed to shift and change, like it couldn't decide what shape to be. Dr. Chambers grabbed my arm. "The company has a containment protocol, a way to destroy it. But you'll need access to the main facility." "Where?" I asked, my eyes still on the creature outside. "Atlantic City, the old administrative building on the boardwalk. There's a basement level, not on any public plans. Everything you need is there." The grass had completely died now. The trees at the edge of his property began to twist and bend, their branches reaching toward the house like fingers. "Go out the back," Dr. Chambers said, pushing me toward the kitchen. "I'll buy you some time." I didn't want to leave him, but I had no choice. As I ran through his back door, I heard glass breaking, that terrible screech roar, and then Dr. Chambers screaming, a sound that cut off far too suddenly. In my truck, speeding away, I opened the folder. Hundreds of names, hundreds of people who had worked on creating this nightmare. And as I flipped through, I noticed something else. Many names already had dates written next to them. Dates of death. The Jersey Devil wasn't random. It was working through a list, and it was saving me for something special. I drove straight to Atlantic City, the folder of names heavy on the seat beside me. The sun was setting by the time I reached the boardwalk, painting everything in shades of red. Like a warning. The old administrative building stood at the quiet end of the boardwalk, its windows dark. The main doors were locked, but I found a service entrance around back, with a rusted padlock I could break with a rock. Inside, everything was covered in dust. I used my flashlight to find the stairs leading down. The basement door had a keypad. Lock, but someone had taped a sticky note with the code right next to it. People always do that, even with important secrets. The basement was different from the rest of the building. Clean, well kept, like someone had been using it recently. Filing cabinets lined the walls. In the center of the room was a large table with maps of the Pine Barrens spread out. Red pins, marked spots throughout the forest. Dumping sites, I realized. And in the corner, a door marked Specimen Storage. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Inside were glass tanks filled with yellowish liquid, and floating in them were things, parts of things, pieces that looked like they came from the Jersey Devil, but smaller, like they were trying to grow new ones. A notebook sat open next to one tank. The notes talked about controlled breeding program and weaponized environmental response. They were growing these things on purpose. As I backed away from the tanks, the lights flickered. Then a voice came from behind me. "Ellie?" I spun around, my heart stopping. It was James's voice, my husband, who died in the war. "Ellie, why did you make the bombs that killed me?" There was no one there, just empty air. But the voice was so real. "You built the weapons that burned me alive, Ellie." I covered my ears, but the voice was inside my head now. "You poisoned the land, just like you poisoned me." "Stop it!" I screamed. "James is dead! You're not him!" A horrible laugh echoed through the room. Not James anymore. Something else. "We remember everyone who hurt us," the voice said. Now it sounded like many voices speaking together. "The soldiers who killed the Lenape, the company that poisoned the water, the workers who made the chemicals, you, Ellie Hartwell." The lights went out completely. In the darkness, I saw a faint green glow coming from the hallway outside the specimen room. I ran through the dark basement, up the stairs, out into the night air, but the voice followed me. "The reckoning has begun. Back in my truck, I tried to calm down. It was playing tricks on me, getting in my head. But how did it know about James? How did it know my guilt? I drove back toward the Pine Barrens. I needed to warn people. The list in the folder showed the Jersey Devil wasn't just killing old factory workers anymore. It was going after everyone. Company executives, government officials who looked the other way, even the children of people who worked there. As I neared the forest, I saw something that made me stop the truck in the middle of the road. The trees were dying, all of them, for miles. Their needles turning brown and dropping. The famous pines of the Pine Barrens were giving up their ghosts all at once. I rolled down my window and immediately started coughing. The air smelled wrong, like chemicals and rot mixed together. The Jersey Devil was releasing all the toxins that had been stored in the ecosystem for decades. When I finally reached the nearest town, people were loading up their cars, evacuating. Many were already sick. Skin rashes, trouble breathing. The poison had reached the water supply. I spotted Sheriff Miller directing traffic and pulled up beside him. "Ellie!" he shouted over the noise. "Get out while you can! The whole area's being quarantined." "What's happening?" I asked. "Some kind of chemical leak, they're saying, from the old industrial sites." He leaned closer. "But I've lived here my whole life, Ellie. I've seen things in those woods. This isn't just chemicals." "I know," I said. "I've seen it too." His eyes widened. "Then you know we can't stop it. This is Judgment Day for what we did to these woods." "What do you mean, we?" He looked away. "Everyone in town knew about the dumping. The company paid us to keep quiet. Good jobs, new schools. We sold our souls for progress. And now the bills come due." A military helicopter flew overhead, heading toward the heart of the Barrens. "They're sending in a chemical response team," Miller said. "But between you and me, I think they're just going to burn it all, burn the whole forest down to contain whatever's happening." The thought of the entire Pine Barrens in flames made my stomach turn. All that poison released into the air at once would kill thousands. "I need to stop this," I said. Miller looked at me like I was crazy. "Stop what?" "A monster. The military." "You're just one person, Ellie." But I knew something he didn't. The Jersey Devil wasn't just mindlessly attacking. It had a plan. And somehow I was part of it. As I drove away from the evacuation, deeper into the dying forest, I felt a strange tingling in my hands. Looking down, I saw my skin had a faint green glow, the same color as the Jersey Devil's eyes. The chemicals were changing me too. The deeper I drove into the Barrens, the worse things got. Dead animals lined the roads, deer, foxes, birds, their bodies twisted and changed. The trees weren't just dying. They were bleeding a thick yellow sap that glowed, faintly in the growing darkness. My skin's glow was getting brighter too. The tingling had spread up my arms to my shoulders. I should have been scared, but instead I felt different. Like I could sense the forest around me in ways I never could before. I knew where I needed to go without looking at a map. The original factory site, the place where it all began. When I arrived at the sinkhole, it had grown into a massive crater. The factory ruins were fully exposed now, like an open wound in the earth. The air was thick with chemical fog, making it hard to breathe. But somehow, it didn't bother me as much as it should have. Standing at the edge of the crater was the Jersey Devil, waiting for me. Up close, I could see it more clearly now. Its body was constantly changing, parts of it dissolving and reforming, like it was made of the same chemicals it had been feeding on for decades. Its wings were tattered but enormous, spanning at least 20 feet, and its eyes, those empty, glowing sockets, were fixed on me. "You've been calling me," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. It didn't speak with words. Instead, images flooded my mind. The factory during wartime. Workers, including a younger version of myself, assembling bombs. The chemicals being dumped into the ground, the slow poisoning of the land. And underneath it all, something ancient and angry, absorbing the toxins, changing, growing stronger. "You want revenge," I said, "for what we did to your home." More images. The Jersey Devil wasn't just a creature. It had once been human. A Lenape shaman who had used his own body to absorb the curse of the land, transforming himself into a guardian. For centuries he had protected the barrens, until our chemicals changed him into something else. Something that couldn't just protect anymore. It needed to punish. "What do you want from me?" I asked. The creature extended one long, clawed hand toward me. In my mind, I saw a vision of the two of us together, spreading the chemicals across the country, making all of America feel the pain the barons had endured. A toxic apocalypse. "No," I said, stepping back. "I won't help you kill innocent people." The Jersey Devil screeched, its body convulsing with rage. The ground shook. From the crater, a cloud of yellow gas began to rise. The creature was releasing everything at once, all the stored poison from decades of dumping. If that cloud reached populated areas, thousands would die. Behind me, I heard the sound of helicopters approaching. The military. They would try to bomb the site, burn it all away, but that would only spread the chemicals faster. I looked down at my glowing skin. The changes in me had happened because I'd worked with these chemicals before. I had built up a resistance. Maybe that meant something. An idea formed in my mind, a terrible one. "There's another way," I said to the creature. I walked to my truck and grabbed the folder of names. Then I approached the Jersey Devil slowly. "You want justice for what was done to you, to this land." I held up the folder. "These are the people responsible, the ones who made the decisions, not innocent people who never even knew this place existed." I opened the folder and showed it the list of executives, the ones who had kept the dumping going long after the war, the ones who had turned the Jersey Devil into a weapon. "They're meeting right now," I said. "In Atlantic City. Emergency session because of what's happening here." All of them in one room. The creature's form rippled, interested. "I'll take you to them," I said. "But in return, you stop this." I pointed to the rising cloud of toxins. "No mass poisoning, no nationwide revenge, just the ones who actually did this to you." For a long moment, the Jersey Devil didn't move. Then slowly, the toxic cloud began to sink back into the crater. It stepped toward me, its massive form looming over mine. I felt its claw touch my forehead. More images flooded my mind. It was showing me the original munitions plant, not this testing site, but the main facility where the weapons were made, where even more chemicals were stored, and buried deep beneath it, something the company had left behind. A failsafe, a way to destroy the Jersey Devil if it ever turned against them. "You're showing me how to kill you," I whispered. "Why?" The creature's answer came as a feeling rather than words or images. Weariness. It had been fighting for so long, protecting then punishing. It was tired, but it couldn't stop until justice was done. In that moment, I understood what I had to do. "I'll take you to them first," I said. "Then we end this, all of it." I got in my truck, and the Jersey Devil took to the sky above me. As I drove toward Atlantic City, the helicopters changed course. Following the flying creature, they wouldn't shoot while it was over populated areas. They'd wait until it stopped somewhere, which was exactly what I was counting on. The chemical company's board of directors was meeting in a penthouse conference room at the Grand Atlantic Hotel. By the time I arrived, the Jersey Devil was already there. I could hear the screams from the street below. I should have felt something. Horror, satisfaction, guilt. But all I felt was a cold certainty that this was just the beginning of the end. When the screaming stopped, I drove to the old munitions plant where I had worked during the war. The place where I had helped build the weapons that killed my husband and countless others. The place where this whole nightmare had started. The Jersey Devil met me there, its form somehow calmer now. The first part of our bargain was complete. Together, we entered the abandoned factory. Following the creature's memories, I found a hidden elevator shaft. At the bottom was a bunker filled with chemical containers, the company's deadliest creations, stored away after the war. Forgotten, but not gone. They created you, I said to the Jersey Devil, and they created the way to unmake you. Fitting, isn't it? I began opening valves, mixing chemicals that should never be combined. The creature watched me, unmoving. You knew all along this was the only way, I said. That's why you kept me alive, why you marked me. You needed someone who understood what all this was, someone who could end it. The chemicals began to react, giving off heat and light. Soon they would explode, creating a chain reaction that would destroy the Jersey Devil, this facility, and me along with it. But the explosion would be contained, the poison consumed in the blast, rather than spread. I'm sorry for what we did to your land, I said, to your people. The Jersey Devil reached out one last time and touched my forehead. In my mind, I saw the Pine Barrens as they once were, pristine, beautiful, and I saw them as they might be again someday after the poison was gone, after we were both gone. As the chemicals reached critical mass, I thought of James, and I hoped that whatever waited on the other side, it would understand that in the end, I tried to make things right. The explosion lit up the night sky for miles. People said later they felt the ground shake as far away as Philadelphia. The old munitions plant was gone, nothing left but a smoking crater where it once stood. I should have died in that blast. Sometimes I think maybe I did. They found me half a mile away, unconscious but alive. My skin still had that faint green glow, though it faded over the next few days. The doctors couldn't explain how I survived, or why my blood tests showed traces of chemicals that should have killed me instantly. I couldn't explain it either. All I remembered was a moment of blinding light, the feeling of wings wrapping around me, and then darkness. The Jersey Devil was gone. Whether it was destroyed in the explosion or simply released from its long duty, no one could say for sure. But the sightings stopped. The deaths stopped. The Pine Barrens began to heal. Not all at once, of course. Parts of the forest were declared a permanent hazardous zone, too toxic for anyone to enter safely. The chemical company faced criminal charges for decades of illegal dumping, though most of the people truly responsible were already dead, either from the Jersey Devil's justice or the explosion at the Grand Atlantic Hotel. The military covered up what they could, called it a chemical accident, an ecological disaster. They never mentioned the creature, but the locals knew. They always had. I gave my testimony to government investigators, telling them everything about the dumping, the cover-up, the list of names. I left out the parts about the Jersey Devil. Some truths are too strange for official reports. For months after, I had dreams of flying over the Pine Barrens, seeing the land through different eyes. Dreams of centuries passing, trees growing back, poison slowly fading from the soil. Dreams of watching over the forest, guarding it in a new way. I left the ranger service. Couldn't stay in those woods anymore. Too many memories, too many ghosts. Instead, I took what I knew to other places, other forests threatened by the same kind of greed and carelessness that had poisoned the barrens. My story spread, though most thought it was just that, a story. But it changed things. New laws were passed about chemical disposal. Old dumping grounds were found and cleaned up. People started paying attention to what was happening in the quiet places, the forgotten places. They called me an environmental hero, a whistleblower. They didn't know the full truth, that my hands weren't clean, that I had helped create the weapons whose poison had started it all, that in the end I had made a deal with something that wasn't human. 5 years later, I went back to the Pine Barrens, just once, to see what had become of it. Parts of the forest were still dead, still poisoned. But at the edges of those zones, new growth was pushing through. Young pines, straight and true, not twisted like before. Birds had returned, even deer, though they looked normal now, no extra teeth, no strange mutations. I walked to the edge of the quarantine zone, to the crater that had once been the hidden factory site. It was filled with murky water now, but nothing glowed or bubbled. The land was recovering, slowly but surely. As the sun began to set, I saw something move at the far side of the crater, a tall, dark shape watching me from between the trees. For a moment my skin tingled, that old green glow returning briefly before fading away. "Are you still here?" I whispered. "Or are you part of me now?" The shape disappeared into the gathering darkness. But on the breeze, I thought I heard a voice, not threatening now, but calm, peaceful. "The reckoning is complete." I drive away from the Pine Barrens that night and never went back again. But sometimes, when I'm fighting to protect other wild places, I feel a strength inside me that isn't entirely my own, a determination that comes from somewhere else or someone else. And sometimes, when industries try to hide their poisons, when they think no one is watching their secret dumping grounds, strange accidents happen. Whistleblowers come forward. Evidence appears unexpectedly. The Jersey Devil may be gone from the Pine Barrens, but its spirit, its purpose, lives on in the recovered forest, in the laws that now protect our wild places, and in me. Because some reckonings never truly end. They just change shape and find new guardians to carry them forward. I am Eleanor Hartwell, and this is my testimony, my confession, my legacy. The Pine Barrens reckoning continues. My name is Catherine Thornfield, but everyone calls me Cat. I'm 28 years old and used to be an anthropologist before I took this ranger job in the Boundary Waters. I came here to study Ojibwe legends about the Wendigo for my PhD. Funny how life works out sometimes. What started as research might be the death of me. It all began with the ice fishing shelter. I was doing my usual patrol, checking on the few brave souls who decided to winter in this remote wilderness. The cold this year was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. The weather station recorded 60 degrees last night, and the lakes had ice nearly 8 feet thick. Even the old-timers said they'd never seen a winter this harsh. When I approached the small shelter, something felt wrong. No smoke from the portable heater. No fishing lines visible through the ice holes, just silence. I knocked. No answer. I called out. Nothing. When I finally opened the door, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The Johnson family, Dad, Mom, and their teenage son, all frozen, solid. But their faces, God, their faces. They were carved into expressions I still see when I close my eyes. Pure, desperate hunger. Mouths open so wide their jaws had dislocated, eyes bulging, hands clawed, and the marks on their bodies. They'd tried to eat themselves. Chunks of flesh torn from arms, legs, even faces, but they weren't the ones who finished the job. Something else had been feeding on them. Something that left teeth marks no animal in these woods could make. I radioed it in, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the mic. The station chief thought I was in shock, seeing things. Maybe I was, but I know what hunger looks like. I've studied starvation cases in indigenous populations. This was different. This was infinite. Back at the ranger station, I dug through my research notes. The Ojibwe have stories about the Wendigo, a spirit of winter and famine that possesses humans, giving them an insatiable hunger for human flesh. The more it eats, the hungrier it gets. I'd always treated these as metaphors, cultural explanations for the taboo of cannibalism during harsh winters. Elder Mary Kingbird from the local reservation had warned me when I first arrived. "Don't study what you don't understand," she'd said. "The hunger moon comes this winter. When it hangs full in the sky, the Wendigo walks freely." I ignored her. Science over superstition, right? The next morning, the storm hit. Not just any winter storm, a whiteout that seemed to swallow the world. The power lines went down first, then the phone lines. My radio picked up nothing but static, except for one transmission that still makes my skin crawl. The sound of children crying, begging for food. There are no children within 50 miles of my station. When the supply plane didn't arrive on schedule, I feared the worst. I snowshoed out to the small airstrip, following what should have been the flight path. I found the wreckage 3 miles off course. The pilot, Jim, a man I'd shared coffee with just last week, was still strapped in his seat. What remained of him, anyway. Something had gnawed on his body while he was still alive. The blood patterns showed it, and the look on his frozen face told me he'd been conscious through all of it. I told myself it was survival cannibalism, maybe another ranger driven mad by hypothermia, maybe stranded hikers. There had to be a rational explanation. I barricaded myself in the ranger station that night. The backup generator kept the heat on, and I had enough supplies to last a month. I could wait this out. Whatever was happening, Wendigo or madman, I just needed to survive until help came. But as I stared out the window into the endless white, I saw it for the first time. Standing at the edge of the tree line, at least 15 feet tall, a skeletal figure with skin stretched tight over bone, yellow fangs in a skull-like face. And eye sockets, empty, yet somehow watching me. When it smiled, I knew the Wendigo wasn't just a legend, and it was hungry. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every creak of the ranger station's old wooden walls made me jump. Every howl of wind sounded like a voice calling my name. Morning came, but the sky stayed dark. The storm hadn't let up. I made coffee with shaking hands and tried to think clearly. What I'd seen couldn't be real. Maybe the stress was getting to me. Maybe I was seeing things. But then I saw it again. I was checking the windows, making sure the boards I'd nailed up were secure. Through a small gap, I spotted movement in the trees. That same tall, skinny shape, but this time I could see it better. It looked almost human, but wrong in every way. Its body was so thin that I could count every rib. Its arms and legs stretched, too long, with fingers ending in black frostbitten claws. Its skin had the pale blue-white color of frozen flesh, and in some places it had turned black from the cold. But the Wendigo didn't seem bothered by the cold. In fact, it seemed to thrive in it. As I watched, it moved between the trees faster than anything should be able to move in snow that deep. 1 second it was near a pine at the edge of the clearing. The next, it was 50 yards away by the frozen lake. No footprints, no sound. I ducked down when it turned its face toward my window. Those empty eye sockets somehow saw me anyway. It opened its mouth, too wide, impossibly wide, and a cloud of freezing air poured out. The temperature in the ranger station dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The coffee in my mug froze solid. That's when I first heard the voices. "Feed us, cat, we're so hungry." It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside my own head. "Just a little bite, just a finger. You have 10. You only need 9. I recognized the voice. It was Jim, the pilot. But Jim was dead. "The hunger hurts, cat. It burns inside. Make it stop." More voices joined in. People I knew were dead. People from the history books I'd studied. Fur traders who'd disappeared. In these woods centuries ago, the Wendigo wasn't just a monster. It remembered every person it had ever eaten. It kept their voices, their memories, their pain, and now it was using them against me. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The voices were inside my head, begging, pleading, describing how good my own flesh would taste. Outside, the Wendigo pressed its face against the window. Its breath froze the glass, creating patterns like hungry mouths. The cold it brought was unlike natural cold. It went straight through my layers of clothes, through skin and muscle, chilling my bones. I ran to the radio again, desperately trying different channels. Nothing but static and those horrible crying sounds. I turned to my research notes, flipping through pages of Wendigo lore I'd collected. The Ojibwe stories said the Wendigo gets stronger with each meal. It grows larger. Its hunger grows too. The more it eats, the more it needs to eat. This wasn't just a predator. It was starvation itself, hunger given form. I watched in horror as frost spread across the walls of the station, not from outside in, but from inside out, as if the cold was coming from me. I realized then that I hadn't felt hungry all day despite not eating. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness, not in my stomach but deeper in my soul. The Wendigo hadn't just found me, it had chosen me. That night, the temperature dropped again. The generator struggled and finally died. In the sudden darkness, I heard scratching at the walls, the roof, the door. Not just from one direction, but from everywhere at once. And I realized the awful truth. The Wendigo wasn't just hunting me. It was changing me. By morning, I was starving. Not normal hungry, but a deep, painful emptiness that made my hands shake. I stumbled to my food supplies, tore open a can of beef stew, and ate it cold. It didn't help. 3 more cans followed, still hungry. The voices kept whispering, "Feed. The hunger, cat. End the pain." I tried to ignore them as I checked my supplies. That's when I noticed something wrong with the food. Really wrong. The beef stew didn't look like beef anymore. The texture was different, the smell too. I ran to the bathroom and threw up everything I'd eaten. In the toilet bowl, mixed with the stew, were small pieces of what looked like fingers. Human fingers. Had they been there all along? Had I been eating human meat for days without noticing? I checked more cans. They all had it. Bits of meat that weren't animal meat. My food supplies had been tampered with. But how? When? I'd been alone here the whole time. Unless I wasn't always aware of what I was doing. That's when I noticed my hands. My fingernails had grown longer overnight. Not a lot, but enough to notice. And they seemed harder, sharper at the tips. In the bathroom mirror, my face looked thinner. My cheeks were hollow. My eyes seemed deeper in their sockets, but they reflected light, like an animal's eyes in the dark. I should have been freezing with the heat off, but I wasn't. The thermometer on the wall read 10 degrees Cs inside the station, but I felt fine in just my thermal shirt. Better than fine. The cold felt good. I checked my notes again, but something was wrong. Pages I didn't remember writing were there. Symbols and words in Ojibwe that I somehow understood, even though I'd only learned a few basic phrases. One page described a ritual, a summoning. With a sick feeling, I realized I'd been tracing these symbols in the snow during my patrols. Drawing them absently while taking notes. Speaking the words under my breath while I worked. I hadn't been researching the Wendigo. I had been calling it. The radio crackled to life, making me jump. A real transmission, not the crying children. Ranger, Station 16, this is search and rescue. Do you copy? We've received your distress signal. ETA, 2 hours, over. I never sent a distress signal. I tried to warn them. Don't come. It's not safe. There's something here. But my mouth formed different words. Thank God you're coming. I'm hurt. I need help. Please hurry. It wasn't my voice anymore. It was something using my voice. 2 hours later, I watched from the window as a team of 6 rescuers arrived on snowmobiles. Good people coming to help. People I knew. I tried to scream, to wave them away. My body wouldn't obey me. They never made it to the door. The snow around them erupted. Not one Wendigo now. 3, 4, 5 of them. Tall, skeletal figures moving, faster than the eye could track. The screams lasted only minutes. I watched, trapped in my own body as the Wendigos fed. With each bite they grew larger, their limbs stretched longer, their hunger intensified. When it was over, the largest one, the first one I'd seen, turned to look at me through the window. It smiled with bloody teeth and spoke with the fresh voice of the rescue team leader. "Thank you for calling us, Cat. We're still hungry." That night, I lost time. Hours that I can't remember. I woke up outside, knee-deep in snow, with blood on my hands and around my mouth. Not my blood. I stumbled back to the station in a daze. The radio was reporting similar attacks across northern Minnesota, places miles away. The Wendigos' influence was spreading. That's when I realized I wasn't just a victim. I was becoming a Wendigo myself. My teeth were sharper when I ran my tongue over them. My vision was crystal clear in the darkness. I could smell a rabbit hiding under the snow 100 yards away, and the hunger was becoming everything. I tied myself to a chair the next morning, used rope, duct tape, anything I could find. I couldn't trust myself anymore. My hands didn't look like my hands. My fingers had grown longer, the nails hardening into something like claws. When I caught my reflection in a window, I saw a stranger looking back. The worst part was the hunger. It wasn't in my stomach anymore. It was everywhere, in every cell. I found myself staring at my own arm, wondering how it would taste. I had to bite my lip until it bled to stop those thoughts. But the taste of my own blood made it worse. It was like a tiny drop of water when you're dying of thirst. Not enough, never enough. The voices in my head had grown louder, not just Jim and the rescue team now, but dozens of voices, hundreds, all hungry, all begging me to feed them. I must have passed out, because when I opened my eyes again, the ropes around me were torn, snapped like thread, and there was fresh blood under my fingernails. That's when I heard it, a weak moan from outside. I followed the sound like I was in a trance. Behind the woodshed, I found a man, one of the rescue team members. He was still alive, but changed. Parts of his body were missing, chunks of muscle from his legs, strips of flesh from his torso. But the wounds weren't bleeding. They were somehow preserved in the cold. "They keep us alive," he whispered when he saw me. His eyes were glassy with pain. "They feed on us little by little. The pain, the hunger, it lasts forever." I wanted to help him. I really did. But when I got close, I smelled his blood, and something else took over, something hungry. I don't remember what happened next, just flashes, the taste, the satisfaction that faded too quickly. When I came back to myself, I was alone again. My stomach was full, but the hunger remained. I ran, not away from the station. My body wouldn't let me leave, but to the small shed where I kept my research. I needed to understand what was happening to me, what I had become. That's when I found Elder Kingbird waiting for me. Mary Kingbird sat calmly in my research shed, surrounded by my notes and books. She looked at me with sad eyes that saw everything, what I was, what I had. "Done! I warned you about the Hunger Moon," she said simply. "Help me," I begged. My voice didn't sound human anymore. It rasped and clicked like breaking ice. "You've brought them back," she said. "Not just one Wendigo. You've called the whole pack." She explained what I had done. My research, my innocent questions, my digging into old stories. It had all been part of a pattern, a summoning ritual I didn't know I was performing. "They're not just monsters," she told me. "They're older than monsters. They're hunger itself. Starvation given form, and they've been waiting a long time to return." As she spoke, I noticed other Wendigos gathering outside, not just the 5 I'd seen before, dozens now, tall, skeletal figures standing motionless in the snow, watching, waiting. "They're spreading," I said, fighting to form human words. "The radio. Reports from all over." Kingbird nodded. "This is just the beginning. They'll spread south. Towns, cities, millions of people." "How do we stop them?" I asked. Her eyes met mine. "The Wendigo can only be stopped by someone it has marked, someone who carries its hunger but hasn't fully turned." She paused. "Someone like you, Catherine." I looked down at my changing body. My skin was stretched tight over visible bones. My joints popped as my limbs slowly lengthened. I was becoming one of them, but I still had my mind, for now. "There's a way," Kingbird said. She opened her coat to show me what she had brought. Explosives, enough to level the entire ranger station. "I've been preparing for this my whole life," she said. "The stories said the Hunger Moon would return, that someone would call the Wendigo back." I understood then. I wasn't just a victim or a monster. I was the only one who could end this. Night fell again, and with it came the Hunger Moon, full and pale in the black sky. I could feel its pull on me like the tides. The Wendigos felt it too. They moved closer to the station, circling, waiting. My body had changed so much now. My arms and legs had stretched, joints popping and cracking as bones grew longer. My skin was tight and pale. When I looked in a mirror, my eyes had sunk deep into my skull, and my teeth had grown sharp as needles. But inside, I was still me. Still fighting. Still Cat Thornfield. Elder Kingbird helped me set up the explosives around the ranger station. Her hands were steady, her face calm. She'd known this day would come her whole life. "They'll sense what we're doing," she warned. "They're connected to you now. They'll try to stop us." As if hearing her, the Wendigos began to howl, a sound like wind through empty skulls. The voices in my head screamed louder, begging me to stop, to join them, to feed the hunger. "I can hear them," I said. My voice was barely human now. "All of them, everyone they've eaten. They're still aware, still suffering." Kingbird nodded grimly. "That's the worst part of the Wendigo curse. The victims are never truly gone. Their consciousness remains, trapped in eternal hunger. I could feel them now, hundreds of souls, stretching back centuries. Fur traders, hunters, families, all consumed, all unconscious, all hungry, and they were part of me now too. "There's something you should know," Kingbird said as we finished wiring the last of the explosives. "The plan, it won't work unless the Wendigos are inside the station. All of them." "How do we get them all inside?" I asked. Her eyes met mine. "Bait." I understood then. I would be the bait. As the moon reached its highest point, I stood alone in the center of the ranger station. Kingbird was hidden nearby, ready with the detonator. I took a deep breath and did the one thing I'd been fighting against. I let the hunger take over. It rushed through me like fire, burning away what was left of my humanity. My body finished its transformation in seconds, bones cracking, skin stretching, mind filling with ravenous need. And then I called to them, not with my voice, but with my hunger, a beacon in the night. "Come, feed, join." They came. One by one, the Wendigos entered the station. 5, 10, 20 of them. Skeletal giants with empty eyes and gaping mouths. The temperature dropped until breath turned to ice crystals in the air. The largest one, the first one I had seen, stepped forward. It recognized me as kin now, as pack. "Join us," it said, using Jim's voice. "Hunt with us." For one terrible moment I wanted to. The hunger pulled at me, promising relief if only I would give in completely. Instead, I looked past the Wendigo to where Kingbird waited by the door, detonator in hand. Our eyes met. She nodded. "I'm sorry," I said to the Wendigos, to their victims, to myself. "The hunger ends now." I lunged at the lead Wendigo, using my new form's strength and speed. We crashed through the center of the room, knocking over the station's old propane heaters. Gas began to fill the air. The other Wendigos shrieked and attacked, claws slashing. Pain ripped through me as they tore at my flesh, but I held on, kept fighting, kept them inside the building. Through the window I saw Kingbird's face. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks as she pressed the detonator. Time seemed to slow. In that last moment I felt a strange peace. The hunger faded, the voices quieted. The world turned to fire and light. The explosion shook the forest. Flames engulfed the station and everything in it. The Wendigos screamed, not in pain, but in rage. Their bodies burned, blackened, but didn't die easily. I burned with them. My transformed body resisted longer than a human's would have, giving me one last moment of consciousness. As the fire consumed us, I saw the Wendigo's true nature. Not just monsters, but embodiments of hunger itself, ancient, patient. And as they burned, the cold they had brought began to retreat. My last thought was a hope that it would be enough, that the hunger would end with us. Then darkness took me, and the pain finally stopped. The explosion lit up the night sky for miles. They say you could see it from towns 50 miles away. A sudden flash that turned night to day. For just a moment, Elder Mary Kingbird was thrown back by the blast, landing in a snowdrift that saved her life. When she came to, the ranger station was nothing but burning rubble. The Wendigos were gone. The unnatural cold that had gripped the region began to lift. But not everything ended that night. As Kingbird limped away from the destruction, she felt something new inside her. A hollowness, a hunger. She had been too close to the Wendigos for too long. Part of their essence had touched her. She managed to reach the nearest town 3 days later. By then, the official story was already being spread. A gas leak had caused an explosion at a remote ranger station. The multiple deaths were called a tragic accident. The strange attacks across northern Minnesota were blamed on extreme weather, and isolated cases of hypothermia-induced madness. No one mentioned the Wendigo. Kingbird knew better. She felt the hunger growing inside her day by day. She fought it, using ancient methods passed down through generations, methods that Catherine Thornfield might have learned if she'd asked different questions during her research. Meanwhile, at the University of Minnesota, a colleague of Kat's received a package. Inside were her research notes, somehow salvaged from the fire. The Ojibwe writings caught his attention. Unlike Kat, he didn't understand what they meant, but he was curious. He began translating them, asking questions, looking for patterns. The same questions, the same patterns. One night, as winter approached again, he dreamed of endless snow, of hunger that could never be filled, of a tall, skeletal figure watching him from the tree line. He woke with a craving he couldn't name, and when he looked in the mirror, his eyes seemed deeper, darker than before. In the Boundary Waters, they say the area around the old Ranger Station 16 never quite thawed that spring. The lakes there stay frozen longer than they should. The air stays colder. Locals won't go near it. They say if you listen carefully on quiet nights, you can hear voices on the wind, crying, hungry, waiting. As for me, Catherine Thornfield, the official report says I died in the explosion. That's not quite true. When you become part of the Wendigo, you don't really die. You join the chorus of voices, the Hunger Collective. I'm still here, still aware. Sometimes I can almost feel myself taking shape again, gathering cold around me like a blanket. The hunger moon will come again. It always does. And when it does, I'll be watching from the tree line, waiting for someone curious to wander too close. Someone hungry for knowledge. Someone like you. My name is Marcus Aldridge. I've been a park ranger for nearly 15 years now, but I've only been at Devil's Peak for 3 days. The higher-ups called it a rest assignment. Their nice way of saying I needed time away from people after what happened at my last post. They thought the quiet would do me good. They were wrong. I should have known something was off the moment I drove up to the ranger station. The mist never lifts here, not completely. It hangs between the massive Douglas firs like torn cotton, turning familiar shapes into something wrong. Even in full daylight, shadows seem darker than they should be. The station itself is nothing special, just a 2-room cabin with a small lookout tower, radio equipment, and enough supplies to last a month. My nearest neighbor is 12 miles of rough forest trail away. That's fine by me. After Nam, after watching my unit die while I survived, solitude feels like what I deserve. The first night I dreamed of them again, Rodriguez, Thompson, Miller, all calling for help as I ran. Their voices followed me through the darkness, just like they have for the past 5 years. I woke up sweating despite the cold mountain air. The locals don't come up here much. When I stopped for supplies in the small town at the base of the mountain, the store clerk wouldn't meet my eyes when I mentioned my new post. Devil's Peak's got a history, was all he'd say. I learned more when I checked the station logs. In 1890, a logging camp with 47 men vanished overnight. Their equipment was left behind, meals still warm on plates. The only traces were their boots, arranged in strange patterns on the ground. The investigation found nothing. The company abandoned the site. That should have been my first warning. On my second day, I started normal patrols. The forest here feels ancient in a way that's hard to explain. Some of the trees grow twisted, spiraling like massive corkscrews reaching for the sky. Others seem to bend downward, their branches growing into the earth instead of away from it. I told myself it was just natural variation, that all forests have their oddities. I almost believed it until I found the campsite yesterday morning. The small clearing had a tent, sleeping bags, a still warm cook stove, breakfast half eaten, hiking backpacks neatly arranged. A family of 4, according to the registration they'd filed, but the people were gone. All that remained were their shoes, 8 pairs arranged in a perfect octagon around the smouldering fire. 4 large pairs, 4 small, no footprints leading. Away. No signs of struggle, no blood, just shoes carefully placed as if their owners had simply floated away. That's when I knew. Something was very wrong at Devil's Peak, and I think it's been waiting for me. I called for backup after finding the abandoned campsite, but the radio only gave me static and strange whispers I couldn't quite make out. It sounded almost like words in a language I'd never heard before, soft and clicking like bones tapping together. The weather equipment was acting strange too. The thermometer would drop 20 degrees in seconds, then shoot back up. The wind gauge spun wildly even when the air was still. None of it made sense. With no way to call for help, I had to investigate on my own. I took photos of the shoes, made notes, and searched the area. Nothing. It was as if the family had simply vanished into thin air. As I headed back to the station, I met an old man on the trail. He introduced himself as Joseph Rainsong, an elder from the local Kino tribe. "You shouldn't be here, Ranger," he said, leaning on a walking stick made from dark, polished wood. "Not now, they're waking up." "Who's waking up?" I asked. His weathered face grew serious. "The bone weavers. When people dig too deep or make too much noise, they wake. The logging company woke them years ago. Now someone's done it again." I've heard my share of local legends during my time as a ranger. Usually they're just stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. But something in Rainsong's eyes made me listen. "The bone weavers have been here since before my people," he continued. "They don't see life and death the way we do. To them, bones are just building materials. They take what they need to make their art." "Are you saying something took that family?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not took, changed." Rainsong looked up at the misty trees. "They're still here, just different now." I thanked him for the warning, but didn't know what to make of it. As a ranger, I deal in facts, bear attacks, lost hikers, forest fires, not monsters from tribal legends. That night, I tried the backup radio and got nothing but static and what sounded like children singing lullabies. The sound made my skin crawl. I turned it off and checked the weather instruments again. The barometer was reading pressures impossible. At this elevation, on the 3rd day, I hiked back to the missing family's campsite. The shoes were gone. In their place was a small sculpture made of what looked like bleached white twigs arranged in a spiral. When I looked closer, I realized with horror that they weren't twigs at all. They were tiny finger bones. I dropped the sculpture and backed. Away! As it hit the ground, it made a sound like quiet laughter. That's when I saw it, just a glimpse through the mist. A tall, impossibly thin figure standing between 2 distant trees. It must have been at least 12 feet tall, with arms that hung down past where its knees should be. Its fingers were long and white, moving like they had too many joints. It was watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. But I knew what I'd seen. I'm not alone on Devil's Peak, and whatever's here with me isn't human. After seeing that thing in the woods, I ran back to the station and locked the door behind me. My hands shook as I tried the radio again. Nothing but that same weird static and distant singing. I needed to get help or get out. I decided to hike down to town the next morning. It would take most of the day, but at least I could report what was happening and bring back real help. That night, I barely slept. The wind outside sounded like whispers, and twice I thought I heard footsteps on the roof. When morning came, I packed a day bag with water, food, my compass, and my service. Pistol. I'm not usually one to scare easy. Nam cured me of that. But something about this place felt wrong, in a way that went beyond normal danger. The trail down the mountain should have been simple. I'd studied the maps, knew the route. But after 3 hours of hiking, I realized I was walking in circles. The same twisted tree kept appearing on my left. My compass needle spun wildly, never settling on north. The mist grew thicker, and the forest seemed to shift around me. Paths that should have led downhill somehow brought me back to higher ground. It was as if the mountain itself didn't want me to leave. By mid-afternoon, I gave up and tried to find my way back to the station. That's when I noticed the bone chimes. They hung from tree branches along the trail, small, delicate structures made of what looked like finger and toe bones, strung together with some kind of sinew. When the wind blew through them, they made sounds that almost formed words. And the words sounded familiar. Aldridge, should have been you, left us there. The voices of my squad from Vietnam. Men who died while I lived. How could anything on this mountain know about that? I tore down one of the chimes, and the bone pieces felt warm in my hand, like they'd been inside a living body just moments before. I dropped them and kept walking. When I finally found the station again, the sun was setting, and something was waiting for me. On the porch stood a sculpture about 3 feet tall. It was made entirely of bones, not just human, but animal too, all woven together in an impossible pattern. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. It was me. A perfect bone model of my body, but with 4 arms instead of 2. The extra limbs were reaching out, like they were trying to carry something or someone. Next to it was a note scratched into a piece of bark. You can save them all now. I threw the sculpture into the woods and went inside, loading my shotgun and pistol. No more hiking out, no more trying to make sense of this. I was trapped, and something was playing with me. That night, the radio came to life on its own. Through the static, I heard Rodriguez's voice, my point man who died when he stepped on a mine in '68. Why'd you leave us, Sarge? We're still waiting for you to come back. I smashed the radio with the butt of my shotgun, but the voice continued from the broken speaker. They can fix us. They can fix you too. I spent the night with my back to the wall, shotgun across my lap. Every creak and groan of the old station sounded like something trying to get in. When dawn finally broke, I was still awake, eyes burning from lack of sleep. I had to find answers. If I couldn't leave, I needed to understand what I was up against. The family that disappeared, if what Rainsong said was true, they might still be alive somewhere. I had to try to help them. I followed the creek that ran near the station, figuring water always leads somewhere. About 2 miles upstream, the creek bed narrowed and disappeared into a small cave opening. Something about the entrance didn't look natural. The rocks were too smooth, arranged too perfectly. I turned on my flashlight and went in. The tunnel sloped, down gently, widening as it went. The walls were strange, smooth in some places, rough in others, with odd grooves that looked almost like carvings. It smelled damp and musty, with another scent underneath that reminded me of hospitals. The tunnel opened into a larger cave, and that's when I saw them. At first I thought they were statues, 4 figures arranged in a circle, too large, too small, a family. Their skin was pale, almost white, and they stood completely still. But they weren't statues. As my light hit them, their eyes moved to look at me. All of them were alive, but changed in ways that turned my stomach. Their bones had been rearranged, limbs bent at impossible angles, extra joints added to fingers and arms. One of the children had an extra arm growing from its chest. The father's ribcage was opened and reshaped into something like wings. And they were conscious, aware. Their eyes pleaded with me. The mother's jaw moved, her voice coming out strange and broken through a mouth that had been reshaped. "Please, kill us." I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. As I moved, I saw that the family wasn't alone. The cave continued deeper, and in the shadows stood dozens, maybe hundreds of figures. Some looked fresh, others ancient. Their skin dried and paper-thin over their reshaped bones, all of them watching me with conscious, suffering eyes. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the cave entrance, gasping for air, my mind struggling to make sense of what I'd seen. That's when I noticed Rainsong standing among the trees, watching me. "You found their collection," he said. It wasn't a question. "What are those things?" I demanded, pointing my shotgun at him. My hands were shaking. "What happened to those people?" "The Bone Weavers see potential in human skeletons that we don't," he answered calmly, as if my gun wasn't aimed at his chest. "They reshape the living to create something they consider more perfect. They don't understand that their art causes pain." "They're still alive in there," I said. "All of them." Rainsong nodded. "The Weavers preserve life. Death holds no interest for them. It's the living bone they crave, the way it grows and adapts." "We have to help them," I insisted. "We have to get them out." "You can't. Once they've been changed, they can't go back. Even if you could free them, what then? They can't live as they are." I lowered my gun, feeling sick. "Why are you here, Rainsong?" His face grew grim. "They're building something under the mountain, something big. They only take people in special numbers, 3, 7, 12, 21, sacred numbers. They're following a pattern that's been growing for centuries." "What are they building?" "A city," he whispered. "A city of bones with something ancient at its heart." As we walked back toward the station, I noticed more bone, sculptures appearing among the trees. They were watching us, listening, and they were getting closer. Rainsong stayed at the station that night. I didn't trust him completely, but I didn't want to be alone either. We barricaded the doors and windows, though part of me knew it wouldn't matter. If the Bone Weavers wanted in, they'd find a way. "Why me?" I asked as we sat in the dim light of my kerosene lamp. "Why am I seeing all this?" Rainsong studied me with his dark eyes. "You already carry death with you, Ranger. The men you couldn't save, the guilt that eats at you. The Weavers sense that. They're drawn to it." Before I could respond, we heard the sound of an engine outside. Headlights swept across the windows as a vehicle pulled up. "Who else knows you're here?" Rainsong asked, suddenly tense. I grabbed my shotgun and approached the window carefully. Outside was a Forest Service truck, and stepping out was a young man in a ranger uniform, Tim Morrison, according to the rotation schedule. My backup, a week early. I opened the door and called out to him. "Morrison, get inside, quick!" The young ranger looked confused but hurried up the steps. He was maybe 25, with a friendly face and an eager smile that faded when he saw my shotgun and the barricaded windows. "Ranger Aldridge? What's going on?" he asked, looking from me to Rainsong. "You shouldn't have come," I told him, securing the door again. "It's not safe here." I gave him the short version, the missing family, the strange phenomena, the things in the cave. I left out the worst details. No need to terrify the kid completely. He looked skeptical, which was fair. I would have been too a week ago. "So why not leave?" he asked. "We can take my truck and be down the mountain by morning." It won't let us, Rainsong said quietly. The forest changes when they're active. Paths loop back on themselves. You'll see. Morrison didn't believe it, but agreed to stay the night and try in the morning. I gave him my cot, while Rainsong and I took turns keeping watch. Sometime past midnight during Rainsong's shift, I fell into an exhausted sleep. I woke to screaming. Morrison was gone. The door stood open, swinging in the pre-dawn breeze. Rainsong sat calmly at the table, drinking coffee as if nothing was wrong. "Where is he?" I demanded, grabbing my gun. "They took him," Rainsong said simply. "Young bones, strong growth potential." I ran outside, following the screams into the mist-covered forest. The sound led me back toward the cave, but stopped before I got there. In the sudden silence, I heard something else, a wet, cracking sound, like green wood being bent until it splits. Then I saw Morrison. He was standing in a small clearing, but he wasn't the same. He was taller, much taller, nearly 8 feet. His spine had been extended, new vertebrae added between the originals. His arms hung too low, fingers elongated with extra joints. His face was mostly the same, but his jaw had been reshaped, widened, and he was conscious, aware. His eyes found mine, filled with terror and pain. "Aldridge," he said, his voice distorted by his new mouth. "Help me. It hurts." I raised my shotgun, thinking I could at least end his suffering, but a hand grabbed the barrel. Rainsong. "It won't work," he said. "Bullets only damage the outer shell. They regenerate." Morrison took a stumbling step toward me on his newly lengthened legs. "They showed me underneath the city. It's alive, Aldridge. All of it's alive." Rainsong nodded. "The Bone City, they've been building it for centuries." "Why are you so calm about this?" I demanded, turning on the old man. "Why aren't you afraid?" A slow smile spread across Rainsong's face. "Because I've seen it before, Ranger, many times." That's when I understood. "You're with them. You led me here. You let them take Morrison." "My grandfather was taken by the Weavers," Rainsong said, his voice suddenly different, harder, older somehow. "He escaped, or so the story goes, but no one truly escapes. He became their eyes in the world, as did his son, as did I." "You're their bait," I whispered. "You bring them what they need." "I bring them what they want," he corrected. "They wanted you, Aldridge. A man haunted by the dead he couldn't save, but you're too damaged for perfect reconstruction. So they took the boy instead." Morrison moaned, his new body trembling. "There are thousands down there, Aldridge. All still alive, all still feeling, and at the center they're building something bigger." "What?" I asked, unable to look away from what they'd done to him. "A god," Rainsong answered. "Their god, made from carefully chosen pieces, gathered over centuries. It's nearly complete." I lunged at him, but Morrison moved with unexpected speed, grabbing me with his elongated arms. His strength was incredible. "I'm sorry," Morrison whispered as he held me. "They're in my head now. I can hear them thinking." Rainsong approached, holding what looked like a small bone flute. "It's time to show you what you came here for, Ranger. The Weavers have waited a long time for someone like you." As he raised the flute to his lips, the forest around us began to change. The trees twisted, their bark splitting to reveal pale, bone-like structures underneath. The ground softened, becoming porous like living tissue. Morrison carried me, following Rainsong toward the cave entrance, which had grown wider, more elaborate, now framed by massive curved bones that looked impossibly old. We were descending into the heart of Devil's Peak, into the Bone City itself, and I knew with cold certainty that I wasn't meant to return. The cave wasn't a cave anymore. It had transformed into something like a throat, swallowing us deeper. Into the mountain. The walls pulsed with a faint light, and what I had thought were carvings were actually veins running through bone-white stone. Morrison carried me despite my struggles. His new body was too strong, his grip unbreakable. Rainsong walked ahead, playing soft notes on his bone flute that echoed strangely in the tunnel. "Why are you doing this?" I asked him. "Balance," Rainsong answered without turning. "My people made a deal centuries ago. We provide offerings. They stay contained to the mountain. Without the pact, they would spread." The tunnel opened into a vast underground space that stole my breath. It wasn't just a cave, it was a city. Massive structures rose from the floor, all made of gleaming white bone. Buildings, towers, bridges, all connected in an impossible architecture that hurt my eyes to look at. And it was all alive. The bones shifted slightly, adjusting, growing. Between the structures moved the bone weavers themselves, tall, thin figures with limbs like jointed needles and blank white faces with empty eye sockets. They worked constantly, weaving new pieces into their creation. But worst of all were the people, thousands of them, their bodies reshaped and woven into the very structures of the city. Some formed archways, their twisted spines creating perfect curves. Others hung from ceilings like living chandeliers, their elongated ribs glowing with that same pale light. All of them conscious, all of them suffering. "This is what you've been feeding?" I said, horror making my voice shake. "For generations," Rainsong nodded. "Better a few than many." Morrison suddenly stumbled, nearly dropping me, his face contorted with effort. "I can't. They're in my head. But I'm fighting. Aldridge, you have to see what's at the center." Before Rainsong could stop him, Morrison lurched forward, carrying me deeper into the Bone City. We passed through twisted streets where the ground itself seemed to breathe. The weavers watched us pass, but didn't interfere. "They think I'm bringing you to them," Morrison gasped. "But you need to see, to understand." At the center of the city stood something like a temple. And inside, I can barely describe what I saw. It was a massive form, only partly finished but already larger than a house, a body being assembled piece by piece using specially selected human bones. Some parts were ancient, yellowed with age, others fresh and gleaming. The weavers worked on it constantly, adding new pieces, adjusting others. "Their God," Morrison whispered. "When it's complete, they'll expand beyond the mountain. They'll need more materials." "How do we stop it?" I asked, my mind racing. I still had my pistol, but what good would that do against all this? "You can't," Rainsong said, appearing behind us. "It's too late. It has always been too late." But as he spoke, I noticed something. Round my neck was the key to the ranger station's supply shed, where we kept emergency equipment, including the dynamite used for clearing fallen trees. Morrison saw me looking at the key. Something like hope flickered in his transformed eyes. "I can get you out," he whispered, "but there's a price." "Name it," I said immediately. "All these people, they're suffering. They'll never stop suffering unless—" I understood. "I'd be killing them all." Morrison nodded, his elongated neck making the gesture grotesque. "Including me. It's the only mercy left." Before I could enter, Morrison suddenly twisted, throwing me toward one of the bone structures. I heard Rainsong shout, saw him raise the flute again. But Morrison moved with incredible speed, using his new form in ways the weavers hadn't anticipated. He grabbed the bone flute and snapped it. The sound that came out was like a scream echoing through the city. The weavers turned as one, their blank faces somehow radiating rage. "Run!" Morrison shouted, his voice no longer human. "I'll hold them." I ran, through the twisting streets of the Bone City, past reaching hands and pleading eyes. I could hear the weavers pursuing, their needle-like fingers clicking against bone streets. Behind me, Morrison roared, a sound of rage and pain and final defiance. Somehow I found the tunnel leading up. Maybe Morrison was guiding me somehow, using his connection to the city. I didn't question it, just ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached. I burst out of the cave into daylight. The ranger station was just ahead. I sprinted for the supply shed, fumbling with the key as I heard something emerging from the cave behind me. Inside the shed were 6 sticks of dynamite, used for clearing. They blocked trails. I grabbed them all, along with the detonator. I didn't have a plan, just a desperate need to end the horror beneath the mountain. As I turned to leave, I saw them. 3 bone weavers standing at the edge of the clearing. Behind them came Rainsong, his face no longer human, his skin pulling back to reveal bone underneath. "You cannot stop what has grown for centuries," his voice came, though his mouth didn't move. But I had to try, for Morrison, for the family, for all those trapped in living agony beneath the mountain. I ran back toward the cave, dynamite clutched to my chest. The weavers followed but didn't try to stop me. Maybe they didn't understand what I carried. Maybe they thought I was surrendering. I reached the entrance and kept going, down into darkness, toward the horror at the heart of the mountain, toward the only thing that resembled redemption. Behind me, I heard the clicking of bone fingers on stone, getting closer. I don't remember much about setting the dynamite. My hands moved automatically, placing the sticks in a circle around the half-formed god at the center of the bone city. The weavers watched me, their blank faces somehow curious. They didn't understand what I was doing. Explosives were too new, too human for their ancient minds to recognize as a threat. As I worked, I saw Morrison again. They had captured him, were already beginning to reshape him further. His eyes met mine across the bone chamber. He nodded slightly. "Do it," he mouthed. The detonator was simple, just a plunger, and enough. Wire to get me partway up the tunnel. Not far enough, probably, but that didn't matter anymore. I thought about my squad in Vietnam, about how I'd survived when they didn't, about the guilt I'd carried for 5 years. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to my dead friends or to the living people trapped in the Bone City. I pressed the plunger. The explosion was bigger than I expected. The tunnel collapsed around me as I ran, rocks and bone fragments raining down. Something sharp hit my head, and everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. They told me hikers had found me half buried at the base of Devil's Peak, which had partially collapsed in what officials were calling a natural sinkhole event. I was the only survivor. The doctor said I kept talking about bone people and living architecture while I was unconscious. They've assigned me a psychiatrist who nods sympathetically when I try to explain what really happened. He writes things like combat-related psychosis and PTSD manifestations in his notebook. Nobody believes me, not the Forest Service investigators, not the search and rescue teams who found no trace of Ranger Morrison or Elder Rainsong, not even the families of the missing hikers. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, if the guilt and loneliness finally broke something in my mind. But then I look at my hands. Ever since I woke up, they've been covered in a fine white dust. No matter how many times I wash them, it comes back within hours. The doctors say it's just dry skin, prescribe lotions that don't help. I know better, it's bone dust, and it won't wash off. Last night, a new nurse came to check my vitals. As she leaned over me, she whispered, "They're still there, you know. You only collapse the upper chamber. The city goes deeper." When I looked at her in shock, her eyes changed, just for a second. Empty sockets in a blank face. She smiled. "We're very patient, Ranger Aldridge, and now you're carrying a piece of us." This morning, I noticed small bumps under the skin of my forearm, arranged in a perfect geometric pattern. When I press them, they feel hard, like new bone forming. The hospital staff don't see what's happening to me, but the patients do. Last night, an old man across the hall asked me why I was growing extra fingers. A little girl on the pediatric floor asked if she could have pretty bones like mine someday. I've been moved to isolation now. They think I'm contagious, spreading some kind of delusion, They don't understand that what's spreading is much worse. In the bathroom mirror, I can see changes starting in my face. Subtle shifts in the bone structure, my jaw widening slightly, my cheekbones becoming more pronounced. I try to tell them, but no one listens. By the time they notice, it will be too late. Because the bone weavers weren't just collecting bodies for their city. They were looking for the perfect vessel to carry their essence into the world if they were ever threatened. And they found me, a man already haunted by death, already familiar with survivor's guilt, the perfect seed for a new bone city. I can feel them inside me now, their ancient knowledge seeping into my mind, teaching me how to see the beautiful potential in living bones, how to reshape instead of destroy, how to create perfection from flawed human forms. Soon, they tell me, I'll be ready to start my own collection, and I'm afraid they're right.